your grandmother could stretch a nickel into a full dinner table. During the 1930s, black families across the South turned almost nothing into meals that kept entire households alive. A handful of cornmeal, a pot of water, some foraged greens from the ditch bank, and somehow everybody ate. These were not fancy recipes. They were acts of survival passed down from one kitchen to the next. Some of these dishes carried families through the worst years this country has ever seen. Others disappeared so completely that even the names are hard to find now. Here are 100 cheap 1930s dishes our black ancestors ate to survive. Watch the full compilation and see how many of these your family still remembers. Number 21, fatback and onion sandwich. Fatback was the cheapest cut of black butcher in the South, sold by weight in the 1920s, and it traveled like leather. Porters' wives fried it slow until the strips curled into amber ribbons, then layered them with raw onion between two slices of bakery bread, bought day old for half price. The sandwich was wrapped in a single sheet of newsprint and pressed under a tin lid to flatten the bread into the meat. By the time the porter sat down on the steps of the baggage car to eat it, the onion had bitten into the fat, and the whole thing tasted like Sunday morning at a kitchen table in Tuskegee. It was a meal his father had eaten, his grandfather too. The train just carried it further than it had ever gone before. And if the guinea hen stew carried the flavor of something wild, peanut soup carried something older, a memory of West Africa that crossed the ocean in the hands of every black cook who kept making it. West African nut soup tradition, where groundnut stews formed the center of a meal, came through the Middle Passage intact. The Bantu word for peanut, nguba, was recorded in the American South as early as 1834. George Washington Carver, working in the 1920s, documented the peanut as a primary protein source for Southern black households and identified over 300 uses in his Tuskegee research. The soup, raw peanuts boiled soft, mashed into paste, combined with sweet potato and onion, thinned with water or bone broth, seasoned with salt and red pepper, rich enough to coat a spoon, cheap enough to make from what grew in the yard. It was not poor food, it was a direct line to a culinary tradition that predated America by several thousand years. Pickle sandwiches provided tangy lunches when refrigerators held little else beyond jars of home-canned vegetables. Families sliced pickles lengthwise and layered them between bread spread with whatever fat was available. The pickles offered crunch, acidity, and flavor that made plain bread interesting. During summer, when gardens overproduced cucumbers, families canned dozens of jars, ensuring pickle availability through winter. The vinegar brine provided some nutritional value, while cucumbers offered modest vitamins. Children ate these without complaint because the tangy crunch satisfied in ways plain bread alone never could. The sandwiches traveled well since pickles didn't spoil, and bread stayed fresher when moisture from the pickles kept it soft. This lunch represented families who preserved summer abundance for winter scarcity. And if the biscuit work took patience, it was nothing compared to what starting a pound cake properly required. 7 minutes. That was the standard in the kitchens, where pound cake was taken seriously. Not 3, not 5, but a full 7 minutes of butter and sugar beating together before a single egg went in. By the end of it, the butter would be pale and nearly white. So aerated, it had roughly doubled in volume, and the sound of the beaters would have shifted from a dense thud to something lighter and faster. This was not decoration. The extended creaming process is what gives soul food pound cake its characteristic crumb and lift without extra leavening. The sugar crystals Working against the fat over those 7 minutes cut millions of tiny air pockets into the butter, and those pockets carried the cake upward in the oven. The 7 up-pound cake tradition, documented in African American households across the South since at least the 1950s, depended on long creaming plus soda carbonation together for its signature height. What you build in the first 7 minutes is what you taste in the last slice. Sorghum mush was a breakfast porridge that combined two of the cheapest pantry staples into a comfort food that sustained Black families through the hardest times. Cornmeal was cooked slowly with water until it thickened into smooth porridge, then sweetened generously with sorghum syrup, the dark, earthy sweetener that rural families made from their own cane. The mush was served hot in deep bowls, sometimes with butter melting on top or cold milk poured around the edges. Children loved the sweet warmth on cold mornings, not knowing they were eating survival food designed to stretch ingredients as far as possible. Sorghum provided iron and minerals that refined sugar lacked. The dish could be made in large batches, and leftover mush was sliced and fried the next morning, creating an entirely different meal from the same ingredients. Boiled peanuts and cornbread was a pairing that showed how Black families turned garden crops into dependable morning meals. Raw peanuts were boiled in salted water until soft and briny, their shells giving way to warm, tender centers packed with protein. Cornbread was baked fresh or saved from the night before, crumbled and eaten alongside for a combination that was salty, filling, and cheap. Peanuts grew easily in southern soil, making them accessible to families farming small plots. Cornmeal cost almost nothing and stretched across days. Together, the two required no expensive ingredients and no complicated preparation. Children grew up eating the pairing without question, while adults relied on its staying power before heading to fields. Boiled peanuts and cornbread was humble food that carried tradition and survival in every bite. Pig feet and black-eyed peas was New Year's food that promised luck and prosperity, but families ate it year-round because it stretched pennies into abundance. Pig feet, sold cheap because most shoppers considered them undesirable, were simmered for hours until the collagen melted into silky richness and the meat fell tender from the bone. Black-eyed peas joined the pot, absorbing the porky broth until they became creamy and deeply flavored. The dish was served over rice, the thick cooking liquid acting as gravy that made every bite satisfying. During the 1940s, when ration books limited meat purchases, pig feet provided protein that didn't count against precious stamps. The combination of legumes and pork created complete nutrition for almost nothing. Children learned to navigate around the small bones, finding every morsel of tender meat. This wasn't elegant food, but it was honest and filling, connecting wartime families to traditions that had sustained their ancestors through harder times. Mustard greens hit the pot with a bite that collards never had. Sharper, peppery, almost aggressive, until the long simmer tamed them into something dark and tender. In West Africa, leafy greens sat at the center of the daily diet, boiled into soups and stews, and that tradition carried directly into the American South. Mustard greens were loaded with vitamins A, C, and K, plus folate and manganese, and cost almost nothing. A single packet of seeds and a few square feet of dirt fed a family through the growing season. Through the 1950s, they simmered alongside collards in the same big pot, seasoned with pepper vinegar that aided digestion and cut the richness of the pork. That vinegar was a health tool in its own right. Capsaicin from the hot peppers boosted circulation, while acetic acid helped regulate blood sugar. sitting in a reused bottle on every table, unmarked and unexplained. She never separated the food from the medicine. They were the same thing, ladled from the same pot. She is gone, and the greens on store shelves come pre-washed in plastic, stripped of the bite and the knowledge.
Rice fritters were another ingenious way African American families stretched meals, turning leftovers into something fresh and delicious. Leftover rice from the night before would be mixed with eggs, flour, and seasonings, then shaped into small patties and fried until golden. The result was crispy on the outside, tender inside, and surprisingly filling. Sometimes onions or herbs were added, but even plain, rice fritters made the most of what little was available. They transformed yesterday's scraps into a hot breakfast or quick side dish, showing how nothing went to waste. This recipe reflected both thrift and creativity, values passed down across generations. It also connected to African traditions of frying grains into cakes, a continuity that survived through adaptation. Rice fritters were especially popular in communities where rice was abundant, linking Southern kitchens to centuries of heritage. Today they are rarely seen, but once they were symbols of resilience and invention. Forgotten now, rice fritters stand as a reminder of how African American cooking honored both survival and culture.
Bread hill pudding was the ultimate expression of Depression thrift, transforming dried bread ends into Christmas dessert no one would guess came from scraps. Bread hills saved throughout the week were soaked in milk until soft, then mixed with eggs, sugar, vanilla, and spices. The mixture baked into custardy pudding with crispy top and creamy interior that satisfied like something expensive. Raisins or dried fruit stretched the dessert further when supplies allowed. Bread hill pudding cost almost nothing, since the main ingredient was kitchen waste destined for chickens. Mothers made this knowing families would never suspect they were eating scraps transformed into something wonderful. The pudding proved that nothing needed wasting when creativity met necessity.
Cabbage fermented into slaws was a clever way families made vegetables last long past their growing season. When fresh cabbage was cheap and abundant, families shredded it, salted it, packed it into jars or crocks, and let time transform it into something tangy and crisp that held up through bitter winters. This fermentation not only preserved the cabbage but added flavor and nutrients when meals were often plain and repetitive. During the Depression, when fresh greens disappeared quickly, having a jar of fermented slaw meant there was always something bright and sharp to cut through heavy dishes. It brought contrast to beans, cornbread, or stews, and made even the simplest supper feel complete. Kids might wrinkle their noses at the smell, but adults appreciated how far a single head of cabbage could be stretched. Cabbage slaw was survival with personality, tart, lively, and always ready to remind families that good food could still exist in hard times.
Sweet potato biscuits replaced wheat flour biscuits on 1930s Black Christmas tables when white flour prices climbed beyond what families could justify spending. Leftover baked sweet potatoes were mashed smooth and worked into biscuit dough, their natural sweetness and moisture creating something softer and more flavorful than plain flour biscuits could ever be. The orange-tinted dough was patted out, cut into rounds, and baked until the tops turned golden while the insides stayed tender and almost cake-like. These biscuits needed no butter or jam. They carried their own gentle sweetness that made them perfect alongside savory holiday meats and greens. Sweet potatoes grew abundantly in southern gardens, stored easily through winter, and stretched flour supplies while adding nutrition. Children loved the slightly sweet flavor without understanding the economy behind it. Sweet potato biscuits proved that substitution, born from necessity, could create something better than the original, transforming poverty into preference.
Sakatumi cake was the 1970s phenomenon that became mandatory at Black Christmas gatherings, its cinnamon swirl and rich glaze making it irresistible. Yellow cake mix was enriched with sour cream, oil, and eggs, then layered with brown sugar, cinnamon, and pecans before baking into moist perfection. The cake earned its playful name from the popular comedy catchphrase, and saying it while serving became part of the fun. A simple glaze of powdered sugar and milk drizzled over the finished cake added sweetness and shine. The recipe appeared in church cookbooks and was passed between neighbors on index cards. Sock It To Me cake proved that box mixes could be transformed into something special with clever additions. The cake represented 1970s creativity and community in every slice.
Number 25, sweet potato pie in a mason jar. This is the meal that explains who Pullman porters actually were. By 1925, the Pullman Palace Car Company was the single largest employer of black men in the United States, and the men they hired came almost entirely from Southern households where sweet potatoes were the cheapest sweet food a mother could put on a table. A nickel of potatoes, a spoon of lard, a pinch of brown sugar, a dust of nutmeg if the cupboard had any. The pie came out of the oven on a Saturday night, was cooled overnight, and on Sunday morning his wife scooped a thick slice into a clean mason jar and screwed the lid down tight. That jar rolled in the bottom of the tin pail across 2,000 miles. It was the part nobody notices about the porter's life. The country saw a black man in a starched white jacket smiling at strangers for 14 hours straight, lifting trunks, shining shoes, hauling slop buckets, taking insults that came with a tip. What the country did not see was the jar at the bottom of the pail. The porter would eat the pie cold, sitting on a wooden crate in the porter's room behind the coal car, the spoon scraping the glass. It was sweet, dense, and it carried his wife's hands in it. Pullman paid him $67.50 a month in 1926 and expected him to buy his own uniform, his own polish, his own meals. The jar of pie was the part of the run that nobody paid for and the part that kept him from breaking. When A. Philip Randolph started organizing the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters that year, he understood that the fight was never just about wages. It was about whose dignity rode in the bottom of the pail. She put them right in the ashes, not near the fire, directly in the gray-white coals that pulsed after the wood burned down. Ash-roasted sweet potatoes were documented in WPA Federal Writers Project narratives. Betty Curlett of Arkansas told interviewers she roasted potatoes on hot ashes in a wash pot, a technique rooted in West and Central African open fire cooking, where food placed directly on coals sealed inside its own moisture. No pan, no rack, no oven, just ash cooled to the right point and the judgment to know the difference. After 45 minutes, the skin came off in your hands, charred and paper thin, and the flesh was dense and sweet in a way no oven-baked version ever matched, caramelized from the inside out by heat coming from every direction. The children who watched her do it grew up and couldn't explain how she always knew when they were ready. She never checked them more than once. Onion sandwiches were poverty meals requiring nothing more than bread, raw onion slices, and whatever fat was available for spreading. Families sliced onions thick, layered them between bread, spread with lard or bacon drippings, and packed them for lunches when nothing else was available. The onions provided nutrition and sharp flavor that made plain bread more interesting than eating it dry. During the Depression and other lean periods, onion sandwiches kept families fed when even pennies for other ingredients had disappeared. Children ate them without complaint because hunger taught appreciation for whatever appeared. The strong flavor meant that even thin onion slices could make bread taste like something rather than nothing. Adults understood these Sandwiches represented temporary hardship rather than permanent condition. Between the 1920s and 1940s, the Southern kitchen slowly divided over pie crust, and the fault line was fat. One side stayed with lard, rendered from pork, used in African American kitchens for generations, its larger fat crystals creating distinct steam pockets that produce a shatteringly flaky texture no other fat can fully replicate. The other side switched to Crisco, marketed since 1911 as cleaner and more wholesome than animal fat. Many black households made the switch, but the ones who kept their leaf lard cold and kept rolling that dough the same way their mothers had, their crusts were different. A slight savory undertone balanced a sweet filling in a way that only lard achieves, and the texture shattered into clean fragments rather than bending. Food scientists eventually confirmed what those bakers already knew. Leaf lard, rendered from fat around the pig's kidneys, produces the most tender pastry of any known shortening. The grandmothers knew that 50 years before anyone ran a lab test. Some of them are gone now, and the lard tins went with them. Streaker lean was the poor man's bacon, a cheap cut of pork belly with thin streaks of meat running through solid fat that cost pennies when proper bacon was beyond reach. Black families fried these thin slices until the fat rendered and meat crisped, creating a breakfast staple that filled bellies and provided energy for grueling workdays. The rendered fat was saved for cooking vegetables, frying eggs, or seasoning beans, making every slice work double duty. This cut appeared at breakfast tables across the South, sizzling in cast iron alongside eggs and grits, filling kitchens with the smell of pork. Though wealthier families looked down on this fatty cut, black households understood its value. The fat provided essential calories during scarcity, and the small amount of meat satisfied cravings when ham was unaffordable. Rice and molasses porridge was a breakfast that turned yesterday's leftovers into something warm and filling. Leftover rice was simmered with water or milk until soft, then sweetened with a stir of molasses. The result was thick and rich, a dish that stretched to feed a family for pennies. Molasses was cheaper than sugar and provided iron and minerals badly needed in homes where nutrition was scarce. Rice, a staple in Southern black kitchens, could be bought in large sacks and stored for months. Families ate this porridge hot from bowls, sometimes with a pat of butter when available. Children grew up associating the taste with home, a flavor that stayed with them long after the Depression ended. Rice and molasses porridge was never in cookbooks, but it passed quietly through kitchens where stretching food was the only way forward. Sweet potato pone was a dense, spiced dessert that satisfied sweet cravings when refined sugar was rationed and store-bought treats were unaffordable. Grated sweet potatoes were mixed with molasses, eggs, butter, and warming spices like cinnamon, nutmeg, and ginger, then baked until set and caramelized at the edges. The result was something between pudding and cake, moist, intensely sweet from the potatoes themselves, and deeply comforting. African American families served it warm, sometimes with a splash of cream or buttermilk poured over the top. Sweet potatoes grew abundantly in Southern gardens, making this dessert accessible even when money was scarce. The dish connected families to African foodways, where root vegetables had long been transformed into sweets. Children begged for second helpings, scraping every bit of caramelized edge from the pan. Sweet potato pone proved that dessert didn't require expensive ingredients, just creativity, patience, and produce from the garden. The smell hit first, thick, musky, sweet, hanging in late summer air along a tree line. Muscadine grapes grew wild across the southeast, and Black families knew exactly when they were ready. The skin was tough, leathery, and you squeezed the grape between your teeth to pop it, letting sweet pulp flood your mouth while the tart skin lingered. That thick skin was the secret. It holds some of the highest concentrations of resveratrol and ellagic acid in any fruit, compounds that protect the heart and fight inflammation. Grandmothers turned them into preserves and pressed them into wine that sat in the cellar until Christmas. Kids ate them off the vine, lips stained purple-black. The vines still grow along the same fence lines. The hands that knew when to pick are gone.
Hog maw was one of the most resourceful dishes in African American kitchens, turning a pig's stomach into something hearty and sustaining. The stomach was carefully cleaned, then stuffed with potatoes, onions, sausage, or other fillings before being stewed slowly. What might have been discarded elsewhere became a centerpiece dish, full of flavor and nourishment. Families appreciated hog maw because it made use of every part of the animal, a practice born from necessity during slavery and carried forward through generations. It was especially common during holidays or gatherings, when stretching ingredients to feed many was essential. The dish carried strong flavors with seasonings and fat infusing the filling as it cooked. Children often learned early on that nothing should be wasted, and hog maw embodied that lesson clearly. Though less common today, it once stood as a symbol of thrift and tradition, proving that every cut had value. Forgotten now, hog maw was a dish of pride as much as necessity.
Persimmon bread was the Christmas treat requiring foraging skills passed through generations of Black families who knew the land intimately. Wild persimmons ripened after first frost, their flesh transforming into honey-sweet pulp gathered freely from trees throughout the South. The pulp was mixed with flour, sugar, eggs, and spices, then baked into dense, moist loaves tasting of autumn concentrated. The flavor was unique, deeply sweet with notes of dates and honey impossible to replicate otherwise. Gathering persimmons was family activity, children climbing trees while adults caught fruit in sheets below. The bread kept well, making it ideal for Christmas gift-giving. Persimmon bread connected families to traditions of gathering wild foods that sustained ancestors.
Vinegar pie custard solved the problem of making dessert when eggs, milk, and fruit were all beyond financial reach. This wasn't the chess pie or buttermilk pie made by those who had dairy. This was water, sugar if available, flour, and vinegar mixed into filling that miraculously tasted almost like lemon when baked. Black cooks poured this mixture into simple pastry crusts, then baked until set. The vinegar provided tartness that balanced what little sweetness could be achieved, creating desserts that children actually looked forward to eating. The pie represented ingenuity born from desperation, proving that treats didn't require expensive ingredients when creativity filled the gaps. In communities where children had never tasted real lemon pie, vinegar pie was special occasion food that marked birthdays and holidays. Women experimented with different vinegar types and proportions, developing recipes that became family secrets. The practice of making vinegar pie taught important lessons about resourcefulness and refusing to let poverty steal all joy despite economic collapse.
Smothered chicken stretched a single bird into Christmas dinner for large 1930s Black families through the alchemy of slow cooking and rich gravy. Yard birds, chickens raised in backyard coops, were too valuable for everyday eating, reserved instead for occasions like Christmas when sacrifice and celebration merged. The chicken was cut into pieces, seasoned with salt and pepper, then browned in a cast iron skillet before being covered with sliced onions and a lid. It cooked low and slow, the onions melting into sweet submission while the chicken released juices that became gravy. The long cooking made even tough old hens tender and flavorful, stretching one chicken to feed 10 or more when served over rice with plenty of gravy. Every piece was claimed, from drumsticks to backs, with children learning that nothing on a chicken went to waste. Smothered chicken taught that patience and technique transformed scarcity into feast, that Christmas dinner depended on skill as much as ingredients.
7-layer salad was the 1970s potluck sensation that appeared at Black Christmas gatherings with dramatic layers visible through glass bowls. Iceberg lettuce formed the base, followed by layers of peas, celery, onions, cheese, bacon, and thick mayonnaise dressing on top. The salad was assembled hours ahead, allowing flavors to meld while the dressing sealed everything. Each serving scooped through all 7 layers, delivering crunch, creaminess, and variety in every bite. The dish was affordable since lettuce and frozen peas cost little, while the presentation made it feel special. 7-layer salad showed up at church dinners and family gatherings throughout the 1970s. The salad proved that soul food traditions could embrace new ideas while maintaining communal spirit.
Number 17, buttermilk and a wedge of onion. Buttermilk was what a Black household drank when fresh milk had soured past saving, and porters carried it in a small glass jar wedged in straw at the side of the pail. With it came a quartered raw onion in a separate twist of paper. The combination was country food brought north by men whose grandparents had farmed in Tennessee and Mississippi. A porter would drink the buttermilk straight from the jar, bite the onion, and call it a meal. It cost almost nothing, and it cut through the grease of every other thing in the pail. Older porters said it kept the stomach right on a long run. Younger porters learned to believe them by the second year. Fried okra sandwiches turned garden vegetables into portable lunches during summer months when okra grew faster than families could eat it fresh. The okra was sliced, dredged in cornmeal, and fried until crispy, then piled between bread while still warm. The texture was crunchy outside and slightly soft inside, the cornmeal coating providing satisfying crunch. Families grew okra because it thrived in southern heat and produced abundantly with minimal care. The sandwiches traveled reasonably well, though okra lost some crispness by lunchtime. Children helped harvest okra from gardens, learning the connection between growing food and eating it. Workers carried these during harvest season when okra appeared at every meal. Fried okra sandwiches proved that vegetable lunches could satisfy as completely as meat. Poke salad sandwiches used foraged greens that grew wild across the South, providing free nutrition for families who knew how to prepare them safely. Young pokeweed shoots were gathered in spring, boiled multiple times to remove toxins, then seasoned and packed between bread. The greens had an earthy, slightly bitter flavor that paired well with bacon drippings or hot sauce. Foraging poke required knowledge passed between generations, understanding which plants were safe and when to harvest them. Families gathered poke from roadsides and field edges where it grew abundantly. The practice connected eating to the land in ways that purchased food never could. Children learned identification skills alongside cooking techniques. Poke sandwiches represented self-reliance and understanding that survival meant knowing what grew free. There was a hierarchy to what went into that tin, and it was never spoken aloud. Salt pork drippings were common, reserved, used carefully, with the flavor carrying the smoke of whatever cut had rendered them. Bacon fat went in separately from sausage leavings because the two had different smoke points and profiles, and an experienced baker knew which to pull for biscuits versus cornbread. African American families in the rural South kept this system from at least the early 20th century through the 1960s and 70s, when cooking sprays and the store-bought shortening began draining the practice from kitchens that had maintained it for generations. When those women died, they didn't take a recipe. They took the knowledge of which fat to use for what and why the tin on the back of the stove was worth more than anything in the spice cabinet. Cowpea cakes turned leftover black-eyed peas into crispy fritters that satisfied hunger when nothing else remained. Black families mashed cooked cowpeas with a little flour, onion, and seasoning, then shaped the mixture into patties and fried them in hot fat until golden brown. The cakes developed a crunchy exterior while the inside stayed creamy and rich with earthy pea flavor. This dish stretched a single pot of peas into multiple meals, served for breakfast with eggs, for lunch between bread, or for dinner alongside greens. Cowpeas grew easily in poor southern soil, requiring little attention and providing nitrogen that helped other crops thrive. The cakes could be eaten hot or packed cold for field workers, making them versatile survival food. Each crispy bite represented the ingenuity of cooks who refused to let food go to waste. Hog's head hash was a breakfast rooted in the no-waste tradition of Black cooking during the Depression. When a hog was butchered, the head provided meat that was stewed, chopped, and seasoned before being fried with potatoes and onions. The mixture browned until crispy at the edges, filling the kitchen with a savory smell that lingered after the meal was done. The flavor was intense, smoky, and satisfying, stretching a part of the animal that others discarded into food for the whole family. For children, it was hearty enough to last through school. For adults, it honored the animal by using every part with care. Hog's head hash was not delicate, but it was respected for what it represented: resourcefulness and the ability to create abundance from what others threw away. Molasses bread carried families through the leanest months of wartime rationing, when white sugar vanished from store shelves and flour grew scarce. African American cooks mixed dark, robust molasses with cornmeal, a little lard, and whatever flour they could spare, creating dense loaves that baked into something deeply satisfying. The bread emerged from wood-fired ovens with a dark crust and moist interior that tasted of earth, sweetness, and survival. Sliced thick and eaten with butter or alongside beans, it provided carbohydrates and iron that working families desperately needed. Molasses was cheaper than sugar and packed with nutrients refined sweeteners lacked, making it both practical and healthful. Churches served this bread at fellowship meals, and mothers baked it for children attending segregated schools. The loaves kept well for days, allowing families to bake once and eat throughout the week. Molasses bread was proof that Black cooks could transform humble ingredients into something worth savoring. Nobody planted dandelion greens. They just appeared, pushing through cracked dirt, growing along fence posts, filling the edges of every garden. The women who tended those plots knew what to do with them. They picked the youngest leaves before the plant flowered, when the nutrition was at its peak. Raw dandelion greens carried more iron than spinach, more calcium than milk by weight, and enough vitamin K for bone health. Cooked quick in a skillet with vinegar and fatback, they cost nothing and delivered more concentrated nutrition than almost anything else on the table. Kids were sent out with paper sacks and told to fill them before supper. Nobody called it foraging. It was just how you ate. When chemical weed killers became routine, dandelion greens vanished from the plate and reappeared on the poison list. Sorghum syrup moved slowly. That was how you knew it was real. So thick it crawled off the spoon and pooled on a hot biscuit like amber glass. Enslaved Africans brought sorghum seeds from West Africa, where the grain had been cultivated for thousands of years, and planted them across the South.
Molasses taffy pulls were more than just candy. They were events that brought communities together in kitchens and porches across the South. Families would boil molasses until it was thick and bubbling, then pour it out to cool before pulling and stretching the sticky ropes by hand. Children loved the fun of twisting and shaping the glossy strands, while adults enjoyed the rare sweetness in a time when sugar was scarce. It was a messy job, with sticky fingers and laughter filling the room, but the result was worth it. Chewy, flavorful candy that tasted like nothing store-bought. For many African American families, a molasses taffy pull was not only a treat, but also a social moment, a chance to gather, share stories, and find joy despite hardship. The strong, earthy sweetness of molasses carried history in its taste, reminding people of both struggle and survival. Forgotten today, it once symbolized celebration and community spirit, proof that even in scarcity, sweetness could be shared. Baked
Brown sugar fudge appeared at Christmas, when white sugar was too expensive, but the holiday still demanded something sweet. Brown sugar was cooked with milk, butter if available, and vanilla until it reached softball stage, then beaten until it thickened into creamy, grainy fudge. The flavor was deeper than white sugar fudge, with caramel notes making each piece taste richer than its humble ingredients suggested. Mothers poured the mixture into buttered pans, scored squares, and hid them until Christmas morning. Brown sugar cost less than refined white, making this fudge possible even in the hardest times. The candy proved that Depression-era cooks could create luxury from pantry staples and patience, turning nothing into something worth celebrating.
chicken feet soup proved that even the most unlikely parts could become nourishing meals through patient cooking. Chicken feet, sold for pennies or given free by farmers, contained collagen that transformed into rich, gelatinous broth after hours of simmering. Black cooks added vegetables, rice, and seasonings to create soups that filled entire families, despite starting with what others considered garbage. The feet's cartilage and tendons broke down into silky broth that coated the mouth and provided genuine satisfaction. This soup appeared regularly in both urban and rural Black households, the feet's low cost making them accessible even during the worst Depression years. Children learned to navigate around bones, finding bits of meat and skin while appreciating the rich broth. The practice of using chicken feet showed respect for animals and refusal to waste anything edible. In Chinese and Black communities, chicken feet were prized ingredients rather than trash, cultural knowledge preserving their value. The soup delivered protein, minerals from bones, and warmth that comforted as much as it nourished despite impossible odds.
Chitterling pie transformed 1930s Black Christmas tables with a savory dish that made chitlins stretch even further across large, hungry families. Cleaned and cooked chitlins were chopped fine and mixed with onions, peppers, and seasonings, then baked inside pie crust until golden. The result was a ham pie that could be eaten without utensils, portable protein wrapped in pastry that traveled well to church gatherings or visiting relatives. Each pie used only a small amount of chitlins, while the crust provided filling carbohydrates. The flavor was intense and unmistakably chitlin, loved by those who grew up eating it. Children carried these pies in their pockets, snacking between meals. Chitterling pie showed the creativity of Black cooks who found new ways to serve traditional ingredients, making limited resources reach further. The dish has nearly disappeared today, but it once represented the ingenuity born from necessity.
Hot water cornbread was the crispy fried bread that appeared alongside every 1970s soul food Christmas meal, its simplicity hiding deep roots. Cornmeal was mixed with boiling water and salt until it formed thick batter, then shaped into patties and fried until golden and crunchy. The exterior shattered while the interior stayed dense, perfect for soaking up pot liquor and gravies. Hot water cornbread required no eggs, milk, or leavening, making it affordable when budgets were tight. The technique came from African and Native American traditions passed through generations. Each family had preferred shapes, some making thin crisps, while others preferred thick pomes. Hot water cornbread proved that the simplest recipes often held the deepest heritage.
Number 28, salt pork and day-old biscuits. Salt pork was the cheapest cured meat a Black family could afford in the 1920s, and porters bought it in slabs from corner butchers on the south side of Chicago for under 10 cents a pound. Their wives sliced it thin, fried it crisp, and packed it between two halves of a hardened biscuit so the grease soaked in slowly over the next 40 hours. It was a sandwich built to survive a transcontinental run without spoiling. The biscuit had been baked Friday morning, sat on the counter through Saturday, and by Sunday, it was hard enough to crack on the table edge. That hardness was the trick. A fresh biscuit would have crumbled in the pail by the second division stop. Porters ate it, leaning over the polishing bench, careful not to drip on the linen aprons. The biscuit absorbed everything the pork gave off. By the time the porter reached El Paso, the biscuit had become the meal. It was salty, dense, and stretched 2 cents into a full stomach. Stewed tomatoes and okra was a summer dish that started on the vine and ended in the pot the same day. In July, when both came in together, Black families across the Deep South picked them at first light and had them cooking before the heat got bad. Okra's name derives from the Igbo word okwuru. It arrived in the American South through West African captives who carried seeds and knowledge of its cultivation across the Middle Passage. Combined with dead ripe tomatoes cut into rough chunks, okra's natural thickening power turned the liquid into a glossy, rich stew that needed nothing more than salt, pepper, and cornbread to soak it up. The technique mirrors traditional West African one-pot stew making, where a single vessel produced a complete meal from whatever the garden gave that day. By September, the overflow went into jars and came back out in January when the garden was frozen solid. The knowledge of how long to cook it, how much heat, it lives nowhere written down. Bean sandwiches turned leftover pinto or navy beans into portable lunches that provided complete protein. Families mashed cooked beans with a fork, seasoned them with salt, pepper, and whatever hot sauce was available, then spread them between bread slices. The beans had often been cooked with ham hocks or fatback, carrying those flavors into the sandwich. This lunch cost almost nothing because dried beans were among the cheapest foods available, and leftovers stretched Sunday dinner into Monday lunch. Children carried these to school while adults took them to factories and fields. The texture was soft and filling, each bite delivering the earthy richness of slow-cooked beans. Bean sandwiches represented the practical genius of Black kitchens where nothing was ever discarded. No buttermilk meant a 10-second fix. You took whatever milk was left, poured a cup, added a tablespoon of white vinegar or lemon juice, stirred it twice, and let it sit for 5 minutes. What came back was close enough in chemistry to do the job. The acid had begun curdling the milk protein slightly, creating the tangy consistency that activates baking soda the way true buttermilk does. The acid-base reaction between buttermilk and baking soda is what produces the rise in quick breads. Carbon dioxide bubbles from chemistry, not just heat. African American bakers in the rural South, especially during the 1940s and 50s, when fresh buttermilk wasn't always available, knew this substitution by instinct. They didn't need a food chemistry textbook. They needed biscuits on the table by 6 in the morning, and the vinegar trick made that possible with whatever was left in the house. The tomato gravy and rice was a scarlet-colored comfort that filled bellies when meat was nowhere to be found. Black cooks started with bacon drippings or lard, stirred in flour to make a roux, then added canned or fresh tomatoes and water to create a thick, savory gravy. The gravy was seasoned with salt, pepper, and sometimes a little sugar to balance the acidity, then poured generously over hot rice. This dish cost almost nothing, but delivered satisfaction that belied its humble ingredients. Tomatoes grew abundantly in summer gardens and could be canned for year-round use, making this gravy a reliable standby. The combination of tangy tomatoes, rich fat, and filling rice kept families going when nothing else was available. Children often requested tomato gravy even when other options existed, loving its bright color and comforting taste. Leftover bean mash on toast was a breakfast that refused to let last night's dinner go to waste. Beans cooked the evening before were mashed with a fork, seasoned with salt and pepper, and spread onto slices of bread or leftover biscuits. The mash was sometimes warmed in a skillet with a bit of lard, giving it a slightly crispy exterior while keeping the inside soft. Pinto beans and navy beans were the most common varieties, cheap enough to buy in bulk and filling enough to carry a family through the day. This dish required no extra ingredients, making it ideal for mornings when the pantry was nearly bare. Children ate it without complaint because it was familiar and hearty, and adults valued how it stretched one meal into two. Bean mash on toast was a quiet act of resilience, turning simple leftovers into fuel for another day. Red beans and rice became Monday tradition in African American households, a dish that simmered all day while families tackled the week's heaviest chores. Dried red beans were soaked overnight, then slow cooked with whatever seasoning meat was available: ham hocks, salt pork, or even just the bone from Sunday's dinner. Onions, garlic, and bay leaves joined the pot as the beans bubbled into creamy richness over hours of patient cooking. The dish was ladled over rice that absorbed a thick, savory liquid until every grain glistened. During the 1940s, when meat rationing made protein scarce, red beans and rice provided complete nutrition for pennies. The combination of legumes and grain created protein as complete as any meat, a fact that African American cooks understood instinctively. Children ate hearty portions on Tuesday mornings, fueled by leftovers that tasted even better the second day. This was working class food, connecting wartime families to ancestors who survived on the same humble combination. Someone in the family went out to dig sassafras roots. The bark was peeled, washed, and dropped into boiling water until the liquid turned deep, rusty red, and the house smelled like root beer and wet earth. Sassafras tea was a spring tonic in Black communities, sipped to cleanse the blood after a long winter of heavy food. Enslaved Africans learned about it from indigenous peoples. The Choctaw ground the leaves into filler powder for gumbo, and herbalists like Emma Dupree of Pitt County, North Carolina, kept sassafras in their garden pharmacies well into the 20th century. You did not buy it. You went outside and found it growing along fence lines and at the edges of woods. Knowing where to dig was knowledge you inherited, not something you read. When the FDA raised concerns in the 1960s, the commercial market vanished, but grandmothers kept digging those roots anyway. They trusted what they knew. Long before those sassafras roots hit spring water, another seed had already crossed an ocean.
Parched corn was one of the oldest and simplest foods carried forward from Native American and African traditions. Whole kernels were dried, then roasted until crunchy, creating a portable snack that kept well for long periods. For African American families, parched corn was both sustenance and heritage, a food that tied them to land and memory. It could be eaten plain, mixed into stews, or carried in pockets for long days in the fields. Children often enjoyed it like candy, crunching on kernels between meals. Adults appreciated its practicality, since it was inexpensive and easy to make in large batches. Enslaved people carried parched corn as a travel ration, proof of its importance for survival. The taste was earthy, nutty, and simple, but it carried enormous meaning, reminding families of endurance. Forgotten now, parched corn was once a cornerstone of resilience, teaching that even the humblest foods could sustain life.
Cornmeal shortbread was the humble cookie that stretched precious wheat flour by substituting corn. creating something uniquely Southern and delicious. Butter or lard was creamed with sugar, then mixed with cornmeal and just enough wheat flour to hold the dough together. The cookies were pressed into pans or shaped by hand, then baked until edges turned golden while centers stayed tender. The texture was crumbly and slightly gritty, with corn's natural sweetness enhancing buttery richness. Cornmeal cost far less than wheat flour, making these cookies affordable when budgets demanded creativity. Mothers baked large batches for Christmas, storing them in tins where they kept for weeks. Cornmeal shortbread proved that substitution born from necessity could create something worth making by choice.
Fried fish heads utilized parts that others threw away, transforming waste into protein-rich meals through skillful preparation. When Black families caught or bought fish, nothing edible was discarded. Heads were cleaned, seasoned, and fried until crispy. The cheeks contained tender, sweet meat prized by those who knew to look for it. Eyes and bits of flesh around the skull provided precious protein during times when every calorie mattered. These fish heads were dredged in cornmeal and fried in hot lard until the bones turned crispy enough to crunch and eat. Children learned to navigate around bones, finding hidden bits of meat while developing appreciation for resourcefulness. In coastal communities and near rivers, fish heads appeared regularly because commercial fisheries sold them cheaply or gave them away. Black cooks fried them alongside regular fish, treating them with the same care and seasoning. The practice showed intimate knowledge of food, understanding that value existed everywhere if you knew how to prepare it properly through creative survival.
Opossum with sweet potatoes was Christmas dinner royalty in rural Black communities during the 1930s, a dish that turned wild game into holiday luxury. Men and boys would hunt possums in the weeks before Christmas, trapping them alive and penning them up to feed on scraps until the meat sweetened. The animal was cleaned carefully, soaked overnight in salt water, then roasted slowly in a cast iron Dutch oven surrounded by sweet potatoes from the fall harvest. The fat rendered into the potatoes as everything cooked together, creating a rich and savory gravy that needed nothing else. A single possum could feed an entire family of 8 or more when stretched with potatoes and cornbread. The dish required no money, only skill, patience, and knowledge passed down from elders who remembered harder times. For children growing up during the Depression, possum and sweet potatoes meant Christmas had arrived, that despite everything, there would be meat on the table and warmth in the home.
Lima beans and rice was the simple Christmas side that stretched pennies into plates full of comfort and complete protein. Dried lima beans were soaked overnight, then simmered with ham hocks, onions, garlic, and bay leaves until creamy and tender. The beans were spooned over fluffy white rice, the cooking liquid becoming a rich gravy that tied everything together. Lima beans cost almost nothing and expanded dramatically during cooking, making a single bag feed large families. The ham hocks added smoky depth without requiring expensive cuts of meat. This dish appeared at Christmas dinners throughout Black communities in the 1970s, often overshadowed by flashier dishes, but quietly keeping everyone satisfied. Lima beans and rice proved that humble ingredients, prepared with care, created comfort worth celebrating.
Number 23, smoked sausage and cold grits. Smoked sausage was the porter's protein when payday was still 6 days away. Black butchers in St. Louis and Memphis sold links for around 12 cents a piece in the early 1930s, and a porter's wife would pan-fry 2 of them on Saturday night, let them cool, and slide them into the tin pail beside a small enamel cup of stiff grits. The grits set up overnight in the icebox and traveled like a brick, eaten cold with the spoon while the train climbed the grade out of Birmingham. By the time the porter reached the second leg of his run, the sausage had bled its grease into the grits and the meal was warm in the mouth, even though it was cold in the cup. It was poor food made smart. 3 working hours of food for the price of a streetcar fare. Chow chow was how the end of the garden became the flavor of winter. As the first cold nights threatened everything, still on the vine, green tomatoes not yet ripe, a last round of okra pods, cabbage that had bolted, everything went into the relish pot. Chopped fine, combined with vinegar, salt, mustard seed, and red pepper, packed into glass jars and sealed. The African American registry documents chow chow as a traditional African American condiment created in the South, pickled vegetable relish used to top field peas, rice, beans, any plate that needed brightness to cut through the weight of fatback and cornbread. Every household's version was different. The ratio of vinegar to pepper to sugar shifted with every cook, every year, every jar, tasted and adjusted until it was right, never measured, never written. When she died, that ratio went with her. Sardine sandwiches became a staple lunch for Black workers who needed cheap protein that traveled well without refrigeration. Canned sardines cost only pennies and provided omega-rich fish that families could trust to remain safe in lunch pails through hot afternoons. The sardines were mashed with whatever was available, sometimes mustard, sometimes hot sauce, sometimes just salt, then spread between bread slices. Factory workers and railroad men carried these, knowing they would taste the same at noon as at sunrise. The fish bones were eaten whole, providing calcium that strengthened bodies doing back-breaking works. Sardine cans stacked easily in pantries, requiring no special storage and lasting months. Mothers packed these, knowing their families would receive real nutrition despite limited resources. Buttermilk might be a workaround, but the fat was never negotiable. Before the dough was started, the butter, or lard, if that was what the kitchen kept, went to the coldest available place, the windowsill in winter, the back of the icebox, or a glass of cold water if nothing else worked. Cold fat is the entire secret to a flaky biscuit. When cold butter hits a hot oven, it creates pockets of steam as it suddenly releases, and those pockets become layers. Southern Black bakers understood this for generations, even when the explanation lived in muscle memory rather than in words. The rule was simple: never let the fat warm up, work fast, and don't overwork the dough, because overworking activates gluten, and tight gluten is the enemy of a tender biscuit. You could feel when the dough was right, and you could feel the second it went wrong that you had held it one touch too long. Field pea hash was a hearty skillet meal that turned leftover peas and whatever vegetables remained into breakfast that carried a family through a full day of labor. Black families mashed cooked field peas with diced onions, potatoes, and sometimes leftover meat scraps, then fried the mixture in pork fat until a crispy crust formed on the bottom. The hash was served hot, often topped with a fried egg, creating a complete meal from ingredients that cost almost nothing. Field peas grew abundantly in southern soil, required little care, and dried easily for winter storage, making them a reliable staple in Black gardens. The hash made use of peas cooked days earlier, ensuring nothing spoiled or went to waste. Mothers taught daughters to press the hash firmly against the skillet, creating the crispy bottom that made each serving satisfying. Cornbread and buttermilk bowl was one of the simplest and most enduring breakfasts in Black homes during the Depression. Leftover cornbread was crumbled into a bowl and covered with cold buttermilk until it softened into a tangy mixture eaten with a spoon. The dish required nothing beyond what was already on hand, making it ideal when both time and money were scarce. Buttermilk was a byproduct of churning butter. cheap and always available in rural households. Cornbread lasted for days, meaning this breakfast could be assembled in seconds. Children found it refreshing in summer heat, while adults relied on its heartiness before labor. It carried history, reflecting the agricultural roots of communities where corn and dairy were staples. Cornbread and buttermilk bowl was plain, practical, and deeply tied to survival. Hoppin' John carried luck and prosperity into African American households, especially when served on New Year's Day, but families ate it throughout the year because it was cheap and filling. Black-eyed peas were simmered with rice, onions, and whatever pork seasoning was available. Bacon ends, ham hocks, or salt pork until everything melded into a dish that was greater than its parts. The peas provided protein, the rice provided bulk, and the pork provided the rich, smoky flavor that made the dish worth eating. During the 1940s, when ration books limited meat purchases, Hoppin' John stretched a small amount of pork into a meal that fed entire families. Some served it with collard greens, believing the combination brought both luck and money in the coming year. The dish required minimal supervision, just time and a steady flame, freeing cooks for other work. Children ate it without complaint because the flavors were familiar and comforting. Hoppin' John was tradition, economy, and good eating combined. He set wire snares along fence rows or walked field edges with a single-shot shotgun, and what he brought back fed the family a lean, dense protein, richer in iron than chicken and carrying almost no fat. Rabbit stew, simmered low with wild onions, potatoes, and root vegetables, was common in Black households from the 1800s through the 1960s. During slavery, hunting at night was one of the few ways families could add to meager rations. The meat was mild, tender when cooked slow, and stretched further in a stew than almost any other protein. Kids who grew up eating it remember the taste, but remember the man more. Standing in the kitchen door before sunrise, smelling like cold air and pine, holding something that would become supper. He is gone. The snares rusted, and the lean, quiet meal he brought home in the dark stopped showing up at the table.
Kush, also known as cornbread hash, was born directly from the need to never waste a crumb of food. Families would crumble up day-old cornbread and fry it in a skillet with pork fat or meat drippings, transforming leftovers into something hot and filling. Sometimes onions, peppers, or scraps of cured meat were tossed in for extra flavor, but even plain, it was delicious. Kush was quick, nourishing, and inexpensive, making it a survival meal that carried many through difficult times. It came from kitchens where stretching food was not a choice, but a necessity. The beauty of Kush was that it required almost nothing to prepare, just a bit of fat, a skillet, and leftover bread. For enslaved people in later generations, it was proof of resilience, turning what little they had into something flavorful. Children loved the crispy texture, while adults valued how it filled the stomach quickly. Over time, Kush became tied to memory, a dish that spoke of thrift, care, and ingenuity. Forgotten now, it was once a staple that showed how creativity turned scarcity into strength.
Cracker pudding turned stale soda crackers into Christmas dessert, tasting far more expensive than its humble origins. Crushed crackers were layered with custard made from eggs, milk, sugar, and vanilla, then baked until the top browned and interior set creamy. The crackers softened into custard, creating texture similar to bread pudding with subtle saltiness balancing sweetness. Raisins or coconut were added when available, though the basic version satisfied perfectly well. Cracker pudding cost almost nothing since stale crackers were scraps destined for waste anyway. The dish demonstrated how Depression cooks refused to discard anything edible, transforming garbage into celebration food. Cracker pudding proved imagination and thrift created desserts worth serving at any Christmas table.
Syrup bread emerged as the answer when there was nothing to eat but flour and whatever sweetener could be found. Sorghum syrup or molasses, cheaper than sugar and available throughout the South, were drizzled over plain biscuits or cornbread to create something approaching dessert. Black children learned to make this treat themselves, mixing flour and water into simple doughs, baking them quickly, then drowning the results in dark, sticky sweetness. The combination provided quick energy, carbohydrates from bread and concentrated sugars from syrup, delivering calories needed for labor. In sharecropping families, syrup bread appeared frequently because sorghum was often the only sweetener accessible when white landowners controlled access to refined sugar. The practice taught children to find joy in small pleasures, turning basic ingredients into treats through imagination and willingness to make something from nothing. Women sometimes added a little butter or lard to the bread if available, creating richness that complemented syrup's sweetness through ingenious adaptation.
Ribbon cane, syrup cake rose on 1930s Black Christmas tables as the towering centerpiece dessert made possible by homegrown sweetener when white sugar remained beyond reach. Ribbon cane, a variety of sugar cane grown throughout the South, was pressed and boiled into thick, dark syrup that replaced refined sugar in everything from candy to cake. The syrup lent cakes a deep, almost smoky sweetness with undertones of molasses and caramel. Baked in layers and stacked with more syrup between, the finished cake was dense, moist, and intensely flavored. The cake required time and care, but no purchased sugar, making it possible for even the poorest families. Children didn't know they were eating poverty cake. They only knew it tasted like Christmas. Ribbon cane syrup cake connected families to the land, to the labor of pressing cane, to traditions that stretched back generations. It proved that celebration sweetness could come from your own fields rather than store shelves.
Watergate salad was the mysterious green dessert that swept through Black churches and family reunions during the 1970s Christmas season. Pistachio pudding mix was combined with crushed pineapple, miniature marshmallows, pecans, and whipped topping, creating fluffy sweetness unlike traditional soul food. Nobody knew exactly why it was called Watergate, but everyone agreed it was delicious and easy to make. The pale green color made it festive, and children loved its texture. All ingredients came from cans and boxes, making it affordable during busy holidays. Watergate salad represented the 1970s embrace of convenience while maintaining communal sharing spirit. The salad proved that Black Christmas tables welcome new traditions alongside cherished old ones.
Number 19, pinto beans with a smoked neck bone. Pinto beans were the cheapest dried bean in a Black neighborhood grocery in 1934, running about 6 cents a pound. Porters' wives soaked them overnight, simmered them all day with a smoked pork neck bone, and ladled a thick portion into a small lidded crock that fit at the bottom of the tin pail. The neck bone gave up its meat slowly through the run, and by the second reheat, the broth had thickened into something close to gravy. Porters ate it cold or warm, depending on the stove access, scooping it with cornbread instead of a spoon. It was a meal designed by women who knew exactly how long a man would be away from a kitchen. Before the persimmon tree gave its fruit, before the possum came in from the cold, the morning started the same way, with red-eyed gravy, which was not really about the ham at all. It was about the pan after the ham came out. Salt ham fried in a cast iron skillet left behind a dark, sticky foam that most people would have wiped clean and called it done. In Black Southern kitchens of the 1920s, that foam was the beginning. A splash of black coffee went into the hot pan. Coffee, not water, because coffee deepened the color and added a bitter backbone that cut through the salt of the pork. Scraped loose, reduced for 2 minutes, and poured over split biscuit halves, still warm from the oven. The result was thin, dark, intensely savory, unlike any gravy made with flour or fat. Nobody who who grew up eating it ever described it correctly to someone who hadn't. You had to be there at that table with that pan. Fried fish cakes transformed small catches and leftover fish into portable lunches that traveled well and satisfied hunger. Families near rivers or coastal waters caught small fish, boiled them tender, then mashed the flesh with cornmeal and seasoning before frying into patties. These cakes could be made from fish too small for proper meals, stretching modest catches into food for entire families. The cornmeal binder extended protein, while frying created a crust that protected the interior during transport. Workers carried fish cakes in lunch pails or wrapped in newspaper, eating them cold hours after cooking. Coastal Black communities perfected these recipes over generations, understanding that water provided free protein for those willing to fish. The cakes represented skill and survival, transforming minimal resources into real meals. You never boiled them for pie. That rule was absolute and didn't need explaining. Boiling sweet potatoes for custard filling pulls water into the flesh. The potato becomes waterlogged, and no amount of oven time drives all that moisture back out. What you get is a filling that runs, a crust that absorbs liquid from below, a texture closer to puree than set custard. But roasted whole in a dry oven, pierced with a fork and left at high heat, the natural sugars caramelize inside the skin as water evaporates, the flesh concentrates, and the flavor shifts from plain sweet to something honeyed and slightly smoky at the edges. African American cooks across the Southeast held this distinction for generations, roasted for pies, boiled for savory dishes, choosing the jewel or garnet varieties for their dense orange flesh and high sugar content. You knew they were ready when the skin had tightened and split, and a slow dark drip of caramelized syrup had pooled on the pan below. If the sweet potato demanded patience, poke salad was foraged food that grew wild along fence rows and untended fields, free for the taking when store-bought vegetables were beyond reach. Black families gathered young, pokeweed shoots in early spring, knowing that proper preparation was essential since the mature plant was poisonous. The leaves were boiled in multiple changes of water to remove toxins, then sautéed with onions and bacon grease until tender. This dish required knowledge passed through generations, teaching children which plants to pick, when to harvest, and how to cook them safely. Poke salad represented the connection between Black communities and the land, even when they owned none of it. The bitter greens provided vitamins desperately needed after long winters of preserved foods. Families who knew how to find and cook poke salad never went hungry come spring. Stewed dried apples with bread was a breakfast that brought sweetness to mornings when fresh fruit was impossible to find. Apples dried during the fall harvest were stored in jars or cloth sacks, then simmered slowly with water and a bit of molasses until soft. The fruit became a thick, fragrant compote spooned over bread or biscuits. Families relied on dried fruit to carry them through winter when gardens were bare and store-bought produce was beyond reach. The stewed apples had a concentrated sweetness that fresh fruit rarely matched, and the warm syrup soaked into bread to create something almost indulgent. Children looked forward to this dish because it tasted like a treat, even though it came from necessity. It reflected the habit of preserving everything the land offered, knowing summer's abundance had to last. Liver and onions provided iron-rich nourishment that African American mothers knew their families desperately needed, even if children didn't always appreciate it. Beef or pork liver was sliced thin, soaked in milk to mellow its mineral intensity, then dredged in seasoned flour and fried until just cooked through. Onions were caramelized in the same pan, their sweetness balancing the liver's earthy richness, then piled on top like a savory crown. The dish was served hot, often over rice or with biscuits to catch the flavorful pan drippings. During wartime, when liver was cheaper than muscle meat and not subject to the same rationing restrictions, it became a practical protein source for budget-conscious families. The iron content was especially valuable for women and growing children, something mothers understood instinctively. The key was not overcooking. Properly prepared liver was tender, not rubbery, with a richness that converted many skeptics. Liver and onions was medicine disguised as dinner. Boiled peanuts were patience in a pot, hours of simmering until the shells went soft and the nuts inside turned creamy, salty, and nothing like the dry roasted kind from a store. The peanut was a West African transplant, and it became one of the most important protein sources in Black Southern life. George Washington Carver championed it at Tuskegee in the early 1900s, developing hundreds of uses, but families had been boiling and grinding peanuts for generations before him. Green peanuts simmered in salt water for 4 to 6 hours, retained more antioxidants than roasted ones, and carried high levels of folate and heart-healthy fats. They were roadside food, reunion food, front porch on Saturday food, a big pot on the stove, everyone helping themselves, dripping brine, cracking shells with their teeth. The peanut man on the corner was a fixture of Black neighborhoods through the 1960s. He is gone now, but the taste of warm brine on soft shells stays longer than almost anything else from those years. There was a plant growing along ditches that could kill you or cure you, depending on what you knew.
Benny seed cookies were far more than just sweets. They were a direct tie to African heritage. Benny seeds, known today as sesame seeds, were brought across the Atlantic by enslaved Africans who carried their foodways in memory and practice. In African-American kitchens, these seeds became the star of crisp, nutty cookies that were both simple and deeply symbolic. Mixed with flour, sugar, and butter, they baked into golden rounds that crackled with flavor. Families made them for special occasions, church gatherings, and holidays where they carried meanings of good luck and blessing. Children loved their crunch, while elders cherished their cultural significance. The tradition of baking Benny seed cookies was strongest in the Lowcountry, where Gullah Geechee communities preserved African food knowledge despite oppression. These cookies embodied resilience and continuity, proving that even through bondage, identity could not be erased. Forgotten by many today, they remain a living connection to ancestral roots, carrying stories in every bite.
Horehound drops were the old-fashioned Christmas candy connecting Black families to herbal traditions stretching back generations. The bitter herb grew wild throughout the South, gathered freely from roadsides by those who knew where to look. Horehound leaves were steeped into strong tea, combined with sugar, and boiled into hard candy that soothed sore throats while satisfying sweet cravings. The flavor was intensely herbal with bitter undertones balanced by sweetness, an acquired taste children learned to love. Mothers made these as medicine and treat combined, giving them throughout cold winter months. The drops cost nothing but labor since the herb grew wild, and sugar could be bartered cheaply. Horehound drops represented folk knowledge passed through generations.
Pan-fried corn was sunshine in a skillet, sweet, buttery, and golden. Fresh ears were scraped by hand, milk and all, then tossed into hot bacon grease until the kernels popped and sizzled. A sprinkle of salt, a dash of sugar, maybe a touch of pepper. It didn't need much else. The smell filled the kitchen, calling everyone to gather round. Each spoonful had that mix of sweet and savory that only Southern cooks could master. It was summer food, made from corn grown nearby, cooked while the day was still hot and bright. You could eat it by itself or scoop it beside greens and meat, but it always stole the show. The sound of it frying was like music, a melody of comfort and familiarity. It was the kind of dish that turned ordinary days into something to remember. Pan-fried corn was quick to make but impossible to forget. The kind of dish that reminded people that joy could fit inside a cast-iron skillet.
Fried pork brains and eggs shocked modern sensibilities but sustained 1930s Black families as Christmas breakfast when every part of the hog served purpose. After fall butchering, brains were saved, cleaned, and kept in brine until needed. Scrambled with eggs, they became creamy, rich, and deeply satisfying, a protein-packed breakfast that cost almost nothing. The texture was soft and custard-like, the flavor mild and slightly sweet when fresh. Served with biscuits and gravy, fried brains stretched a few eggs into breakfast for an entire family. Children ate without questioning, trusting mothers who served what was available. The dish represented the complete commitment to waste-nothing cooking that defined survival during the Depression. Every organ, every scrap, every piece of the animal found purpose in Black kitchens where nothing could be spared. Fried brains and eggs may have disappeared from modern tables, but it fed families when nothing else could.
Lemon pound cake was the dense, buttery classic that anchored dessert tables at 1970s soul food Christmas celebrations with bright citrus punch. Real butter was creamed with sugar until fluffy, then eggs were added one at a time before flour and lemon juice joined the batter. The cake baked slowly until golden, its crust developing crunch while the interior stayed moist. Fresh lemon zest delivered fragrance that filled kitchens. Some bakers poked holes in the warm cake and poured lemon syrup through for extra moisture. Pound cake kept well for days, improving as flavors melded. Lemon pound cake proved that classic techniques with quality ingredients created timeless results. The cake represented the pride Black bakers took in perfecting recipes.
Number 22, hard-boiled eggs in a brown paper twist. Eggs were the cheapest portable protein a Black household could send a working man out the door with, and porters carried them by the half dozen, twisted into a square of brown grocer's paper. By 1931, a dozen eggs at a Southside market ran around 28 cents, just over 2 pennies an egg. The shells stayed on through the run and were peeled at the moment of eating, the salt sprinkled from a tiny twist of paper inside the bigger twist. Porters ate them on the platform at division stops, slightly apart from the white travelers, shells dropped into the cinder bed beside the rails. It was fuel for the next 4 hours and nothing more. The woman who made it every morning is not here to make it. Poke salad was not a dish for the uninformed. The pokeweed plant grows wild across the American South, tall, purple-stemmed, with dark berries that can poison a child and leaves that will make an adult violently sick if prepared wrong. But if you know, picked young, before the toxins concentrate in the stems, boiled hard in 1 pot of water, that water completely poured off, covered with fresh water and boiled again, sometimes a 3rd time. What came out was soft, slightly bitter, deeply green, then fried in a cast iron skillet with fatback until the edges crisped. The food with Roots culinary history database documents pokeweed as a traditional Southern survival food prepared by boiling multiple times to remove toxicity, a technique rooted in indigenous Southern knowledge that Black communities adapted and passed orally for generations. In the hungry stretch of late winter, poke salad stood between a family and an empty table. You did not learn this from a book. You learned it standing beside someone who knew exactly how many times the water had to change. That person is gone from most households now. Peanut butter and molasses sandwiches combined 2 cheap pantry staples into a lunch that was both sweet and filling. Families spread peanut butter on one slice of bread and drizzled thick molasses on the other, pressing them together into a sticky, satisfying meal. The peanut butter provided protein and fat that sustained energy through afternoon labor, while molasses added iron and quick sugars. Both ingredients cost pennies and lasted weeks without refrigeration, making this combination reliable during lean times. Children loved the sweetness, often requesting these even when other options were available. The molasses cut through the peanut butter's thickness, creating a flavor that felt like dessert rather than poverty. Workers carried these, knowing the protein would sustain them through physical labor. White sugar does one thing, brown sugar does three. It sweetens, yes, but it also holds moisture. The molasses in brown sugar is hygroscopic, pulling water from the air and keeping baked goods softer longer. And it brings depth that refined white sugar cannot deliver. Something slightly caramel, the taste of the cane before all the complexity was processed away. African American bakers used brown sugar in sweet potato pies, in cornbread, and layer cakes long before the rest of American baking caught up. During the Depression and war years, when white sugar was rationed and tight, brown sugar was both cheaper and more available, and the baked goods from those kitchens were richer for it. Light brown sugar gives warmth. Dark brown gives depth close to molasses. The women who knew which to reach for never needed to explain why. Fatback and greens represented the backbone of survival cooking in Black households across the rural South. Fatback, the thick slab of fat from a pig's back, cost almost nothing because butchers considered it undesirable waste. Black cooks knew better, understanding that this pure pork fat could transform bitter greens into something rich and satisfying. The fatback was sliced thin and rendered slowly in cast iron until the fat melted and edges crisped. Greens were added to this flavorful base and simmered for hours until tender, absorbing every bit of smoky richness. This dish provided essential calories and vitamins when fresh meat was unaffordable, keeping families healthy through winters when gardens lay dormant. The greens offered iron while the fat gave sustained energy for long days of labor. Collard green omelet was a breakfast born from thrift, and the habit of making yesterday's dinner stretched into the next morning. Collard greens, cooked slow with seasoning the night before, were tucked into beaten eggs and folded in a hot skillet. The result was frugal and flavorful, blending the smoky richness of the greens with the softness of the eggs. Families valued it because it used what they already had, ensuring nothing went unused. The combination gave nutrition and comfort without extra expense. For children, it was a familiar flavor in a new form, while adults enjoyed the heartiness without needing costly meat. It tied breakfast to dinner, blending the rhythms of the household into one cycle of reuse. Collard green omelet carried the quiet wisdom of making much from little and starting every morning strong. Fried green tomatoes stretched the garden harvest into meals that felt like celebration even during rationing. Firm, unripe tomatoes were sliced thick, dredged in seasoned cornmeal, and fried in bacon drippings until the coating turned golden and crisp while the interior stayed tart and juicy. African American families made these at summer's end when frost threatened and green tomatoes had to be picked before they could ripen. The cornmeal crust shattered between teeth, giving way to the bright, acidic flesh that balanced perfectly against the rich fat. Served alongside other vegetables or as the centerpiece of a light supper, fried green tomatoes proved that even unripe produce had value. Nothing from the garden went to waste, not even tomatoes that never had a chance to turn red. Children loved the crunch and the novelty of eating something green that tasted nothing like salad. This dish represented the African American philosophy of honoring every ingredient the land provided. After the first hard frost, when the air turned sharp and the leaves went brown, someone came back from the woods with a sack of wild persimmons. You could not eat them before the frost. They would pucker your mouth shut and leave a chalky film that lasted for hours. But after the cold did its work, the fruit turned soft, translucent, and so sweet it tasted like nature had candied it overnight. Black families made persimmon pudding from the pulp, baking it with cornmeal and spices into a dense, sticky dessert that sat warm in your stomach. Others pressed the fruit into mash and fermented persimmon beer, a practice documented in WPA slave narratives as common on plantations. The fruit was rich in vitamin C, fiber, and manganese. Gathering persimmons was a community event. Kids climbed, elders directed which branches to shake, and the hall was divided before dark. Nobody gathers them now. The trees still fruit every autumn, and the persimmons fall and rot where they land.
Wild green salad was one of the most direct connections to the land, born from the practice of foraging. Families gathered dandelion greens, pokeweed, or mustard leaves from fields and woods, washing and dressing them simply with vinegar or fat drippings. These greens were free, abundant, and full of nutrition, making them invaluable when money and resources were scarce. For enslaved people, foraging was sometimes the only way to add freshness and variety to an otherwise meager diet. The salads were sharp, tangy, and nourishing, teaching families that the land itself could provide. Later generations continued to gather wild greens, passing down knowledge of which plants were safe and when to pick them. These salads were not just food, but a link to both survival and tradition, carrying cultural memory through taste. Today, wild green salad is nearly forgotten, but it remains a reminder of resilience and ingenuity. It shows how African American kitchens created abundance from what others overlooked.
Sorghum popcorn balls appeared on Christmas tables throughout Black households where both ingredients grew abundantly and cost almost nothing. Popcorn was popped over wood fires, then drizzled with hot sorghum syrup, boiled to the perfect sticky stage. Buttered hands shaped the mixture into balls while still warm, pressing firmly so kernels held together. The syrup added deep, earthy sweetness that refined sugar could never match, complementing the toasted corn perfectly. Children received these as Christmas gifts, wrapped in waxed paper or tucked into small bags. Sorghum popcorn balls represented the ingenuity of families who grew their own sweetener and corn. The treats lasted for days, carried in pockets and nibbled slowly to make Christmas stretch as far as possible.
Pone bread rose as the emergency staple when there was nothing in the house but cornmeal and water. Unlike cornbread that required eggs, milk, and baking powder, pone bread demanded only meal, salt, and liquid mixed into thick batter. The mixture was shaped by hand into flat cakes, then baked on hot griddles or directly in fireplace ashes until crusty outside and dense inside. This wasn't delicate food. It was survival bread that filled stomachs and provided energy when nothing else existed. In rural Black households across the Deep South, mothers made pone bread multiple times daily, the smell of toasting cornmeal signaling that at least there would be something to eat. The bread kept well, lasting several days without going stale, which meant one batch could stretch across many meals. Workers carried pone bread to fields, eating it cold with whatever they could forage: wild onions, dandelion greens, or just salt. Children gnawed on pone bread while doing chores, the dense texture requiring real effort to eat but delivering lasting satisfaction through ancestral knowledge.
Ginger water served as the Christmas beverage in 1930s Black households when store-bought drinks remained impossible luxuries. Fresh or dried ginger was steeped in hot water, sweetened with molasses or honey, and served warm on cold Christmas mornings or chilled when weather allowed. The drink provided warmth, settled stomachs after rich meals, and offered something special to sip while gathered around the fire. Ginger cost little at country stores, and molasses was always on hand. The sharp, spicy sweetness refreshed palates between bites of heavy holiday food. Children loved it because it tasted like treat, while adults knew it settled digestion and warmed from inside. Ginger water connected families to traditions older than anyone remembered, a simple beverage ancestors had carried from Africa. It proved that celebration needed no fancy drinks, only intention, warmth, and the determination to mark Christmas as special.
Rutabaga with bacon was the overlooked vegetable that earned its place on 1970 soul food Christmas tables through sheer deliciousness. Rutabagas were peeled, cubed, and boiled until tender, then mashed with butter and seasoned with salt and pepper. Crispy bacon pieces were folded throughout, adding smoky richness and satisfying crunch to the sweet, earthy vegetable. Rutabagas cost far less than sweet potatoes, but offered similar comfort and natural sweetness. The vegetable stored through winter, making it practical and affordable. Children who claim to hate vegetables often ask for seconds of bacon-studded rutabaga. The dish proved that creativity with humble ingredients could create new traditions worth continuing. Rutabaga with bacon showed that 1970s soul food embraced innovation alongside heritage.
Number 24, chitlins cleaned the night before a run. Chitlins were the cheapest pork a black household could buy in 1929, sold for almost nothing because white grocers considered them scrap. Porters' wives cleaned them at the kitchen sink the night before a run, boiling them with onion and red pepper until the smell drove the children out onto the back porch. The cooked chitlins were then packed cold in a small jar and wedged beside the cornbread in the tin pail. Porters ate them at the end of the second shift when the dining car was shut and the sleeper berths were quiet. A man from Mobile said his mother used to cook them with vinegar to cut the funk, and that was the version he carried north with him to Chicago. The meal was old country food riding on a brand new luxury train. The contradiction never bothered the men who ate it. But before the garden gave anything, before the beans had soaked overnight, there was couscous, and it kept people moving when nothing else was in the house. A Senegambian dish documented in WPA slave narratives from Texas, couscous traveled across the Atlantic in the memory of West African captives who had eaten a version of it for generations. Coarse cornmeal poured into a dry, hot iron skillet with a little lard, stirred until it browned and formed a crust, then scraped up and served with cane syrup poured over the top. The result was crispy in patches, soft underneath, sweet from the syrup, smoky from the iron, a breakfast that cost almost nothing and tasted like something worth waking early for. In the 1920s, cane syrup was the cheapest sweetener in rural Louisiana and Mississippi. Nobody makes couscous anymore. Cold grits cakes provided portable lunches made from leftover breakfast grits that would otherwise go to waste. Families poured leftover grits into pans to set overnight, then sliced the firm mixture into squares and fried them golden the next morning. These cakes could be eaten hot for breakfast or packed cold for midday meals, their dense texture holding up through hours in lunch pails. The process transformed cheap cornmeal into something more substantial than porridge. Workers carried grits cakes knowing they would fill hungry stomachs when no other food was available. Some families added bacon or cheese when affordable, but plain grits cakes provided satisfying carbohydrates without additions. The technique represented kitchen wisdom passed between generations of Black women who understood creativity conquered poverty. The bowl of milk sat there for an hour, the liver submerged and slowly losing its edge. This was not fussiness, it was chemistry. Liver carries high concentrations of myoglobin, the iron-rich protein responsible for the metallic bitterness that puts people off organ meat, and milk's casein proteins bind to those bitter compounds and pull them away during the soak. What comes out of the milk bath is noticeably milder, with a cleaner flavor that accepts seasoning without fighting it. African American cooks across the South had practiced this for generations, reaching back to at least the early 20th century, when liver was among the cheapest proteins available, sold near free by butchers who considered it a throwaway cut, transformed into something worth eating by black cooks who wasted nothing. Some households used buttermilk in place of plain milk, adding acid to the process that drew out even more bitterness while tenderizing the exterior. Nobody learned this from a cookbook. You learned it by watching, by being told once, and by understanding that the knowing was not the same as the doing. Pepper pot stew was a catch-all dish that transformed whatever scraps and trimmings remained into a spicy, warming meal. Black cooks added vegetable peelings, meat bones, wilted greens, and any leftover bits to a constantly simmering pot seasoned heavily with black pepper and hot chilies. The stew grew richer each day as new ingredients joined the pot, creating complex layers of flavor from the humblest additions. This dish had roots in both African and Caribbean cooking traditions, where nothing edible was ever discarded. The heat from the peppers masked any off, flavors from aging ingredients while stimulating appetite and warming the body. Families kept pepper pot going for days, ladling out portions over rice or with cornbread. The stew represented communal survival, each meal containing the contributions of many days and many hands. Sweet potato hash was a breakfast that carried both weight and warmth for households that needed energy before long days of labor. Sweet potatoes were peeled, diced, and fried in a skillet with onions and scraps of meat left from the night before. The potatoes browned slowly in lard, their natural sugars caramelizing into a crust that made the dish feel richer than it was. Sweet potatoes were plentiful across the South, easy to grow in poor soil, and simple to store through winter. For families with little money, they were one of the most reliable sources of vitamins and filling starch available. Children ate the hash eagerly, the sweetness making it feel like a treat. Adults valued its heartiness, knowing a single skillet could stretch to fill every plate. Sweet potato hash was never celebrated, but it quietly kept families going. Oxtail stew transformed a cut that butchers practically gave away into one of the most flavorful dishes in African American cooking. The bony tails were browned in cast iron, then braised for hours with onions, tomatoes, and whatever root vegetables the garden provided until the meat fell from the bone. The collagen in the bones melted into the cooking liquid, creating a thick, rich gravy that coated every ingredient with silky richness. During the 1940s, when better cuts of beef were rationed or too expensive, oxtails provided deep, beefy flavor at a fraction of the cost. Families served the stew over rice or with cornbread to soak up every drop of the precious gravy. The meat required patience. There was no rushing oxtails, but the reward was worth every hour of simmering. Children learned to work around the bones, finding tender meat in every crevice. Oxtail stew was Sunday dinner for families who knew that the cheapest cuts often delivered the richest flavors. You picked the berries in July, but the leaves you dried in June before the fruit came in, when the plant's energy was still in the green. That was the part most people did not know. Blackberry leaf tea was a staple of home medicine in Black households, brewed for sore throats, stomach cramps, and diarrhea. The leaves contain tannins that tighten inflamed tissue and slowed intestinal trouble that could weaken a child fast in the days before easy doctor visits. You spread the leaves on a screen in the shade, turned them daily until they crumbled, and stored them in a paper sack. When someone got sick, you brewed a cup, dark, slightly bitter, faintly earthy, and stood over them until they drank it. The knowledge of which leaves to pick and when to pick them was never written down. It lived in the women who walked the fence rows every spring, checking the canes. Your grandmother did not ask if you liked liver. She put it on your plate and you ate it. That was the end of the discussion.
Sweet potato coffee was a creative substitute born from necessity when real coffee was too expensive or unavailable. Sweet potatoes were sliced, roasted until dark, then ground into a coarse powder and brewed like traditional coffee. The drink was earthy, slightly sweet, and comforting, offering warmth in the morning even if it lacked caffeine. African American families turned to it during hard times, stretching resources while still enjoying the ritual of a morning cup. It showed resilience, proving that even when luxuries were out of reach, tradition could still be honored. Children often drank sweet potato coffee alongside adults, since it was gentle and less bitter. For many, it carried the familiar smell of roasting in the kitchen, a scent tied to family and survival. Forgotten today, it once held great meaning, representing both frugality and creativity. Sweet potato coffee was never about indulgence but about keeping dignity and routine alive in the face of scarcity.
Dried apple stack cake was the Christmas dessert proving community cooperation could create something magnificent from humble ingredients. Thin spiced cake layers were stacked high with dried apple filling between each. The assembly left to rest while moisture from apples softened the cake. Each family might contribute one layer, with the hostess providing apple filling from autumn's preserved harvest. The cake improved with time, flavors melding until layers became almost indistinguishable from filling. Dried apples were affordable since families preserved their own, and cake layers required only basic pantry staples. The finished stack reached 8 or 10 layers tall, impressive enough for any Christmas table. Stack cake proved collective effort created celebration no single family could achieve alone.
Okra soup stretched vegetables into filling meals that provided nutrition and comfort during impossible economic times. Fresh okra from summer gardens or dried okra stored from previous harvests went into pots with tomatoes, onions, and whatever else the garden provided. The okra released natural thickeners as it cooked, creating viscous soup that coated the spoon and filled empty stomachs. Black cooks added rice to make the soup even more substantial, transforming a few vegetables into meals for entire families. The dish carried flavors that connected African American communities to West African ancestors who had cooked similar soups for centuries. In rural Louisiana and South Carolina, okra soup appeared regularly because okra grew prolifically in southern heat. The slime that some people found off-putting became crucial for thickening without expensive starches or cream. Families ate this soup with cornbread, using the bread to soak up every drop of precious broth. Children grew up loving okra soup's unique texture, finding comfort in its warmth and fullness despite systematic oppression.
Squirrel stew provided Christmas dinner protein for 1930s Black families living near woods where small game remained free for those skilled enough to hunt it. Boys and men would spend December mornings in the cold, rifles or snares ready, bringing home squirrels that would become the centerpiece of holiday feasting. The squirrels were cleaned and jointed, then browned in bacon grease before being covered with water, onions, and root vegetables from the cellar. The stew simmered for hours until the meat fell tender from small bones and the broth turned rich with flavor. Served over rice or with cornbread for dipping, one pot of squirrel stew could feed an entire extended family. The dish required skill, hunting, cleaning, and cooking, but no money beyond the cost of ammunition. Squirrel stew represented independence and self-reliance, the ability to provide Christmas dinner through knowledge rather than wealth. The meat was sweet and mild, a gift from the forest that appeared on tables across the rural South.
Corn pudding was the creamy casserole that transformed humble canned corn into something decadent on 1970s Christmas tables. Cream-style corn was mixed with eggs, milk, butter, sugar, and flour, then baked until puffed and golden with caramelized edges. The texture fell between custard and souffle, sweet enough to almost pass for dessert, yet savory enough to accompany meats. Corn pudding cost little since canned corn was cheap and other ingredients were pantry staples. It could be assembled quickly and baked while other dishes finished. Children loved its sweetness while adults appreciated how it complemented ham and turkey. Corn pudding appeared at church potlucks and family dinners throughout the South. The dish proved that convenience ingredients could create something celebratory.
Number 27, red beans reheated 3 times. New Orleans porters carried red beans the way Chicago porters carried cornbread. A pot cooked on Sunday with a smoked ham bone fed a family Monday, then traveled with the porter Tuesday in a small enamel cup wedged inside the tin pail. Red beans cost about 8 cents a pound at the corner grocery in 1932, and a single pound fed a household of 6 on Monday and the porter for 2 more days. The beans were reheated on the stove in the porter's quarters, and the flavor deepened every time the cup hit the heat. By the second reheat, the pork bone had given up everything it had. By the third, the beans were almost a paste, eaten with a spoon over a folded napkin. Porters from Louisiana said the third reheat was the best one. The first 2 were just rehearsal. When money ran to nothing, dried pinto beans were what kept families alive. In 1922, a pound cost under 5 cents, enough to feed 6 people if you started them before sunrise. You picked through them the night before, soaked them cold, then in the morning added a ham bone or fatback and a halved onion and left them alone until noon. Salt went in only at the end. Salt early made the skins tough, and a tough bean was a ruined pot. That rule was unwritten, passed by watching her fish one out and press it between her fingers to check. Sharecropper households in Mississippi and Arkansas relied on dried field peas and beans through most of the lean season, stretching a single pot across 2 days by adding water and reheating. Nobody who grew up in these kitchens forgets the smell, low and smoky and dense, filling every room before anyone else woke. Potted meat sandwiches provided affordable protein when fresh meat remained far beyond the family budget. These small tins of processed meat paste cost only nickels and could feed multiple children when spread thin across bread. The paste was salty and intensely flavored, meaning a little went far in making plain bread taste substantial. Mothers would open a single tin and divide it among several sandwiches, stretching resources while ensuring everyone ate before school or work. Potted meat required no refrigeration before opening, ideal for pantries without ice boxes. The flavor was not gourmet, but hunger made it taste like provision and care. Children learned to appreciate what their families could provide. Factory workers carried these in metal pails, eating them cold at work sites where no heating was possible. There was always a tin. It sat near the burner, dented and dark, with a lid that never quite closed right, and it was one of the most important pieces of equipment in the kitchen. Every time something came out of a pan, the drippings went in, the fat from salt pork, the leavings after the sausage was done, the amber oil left after cornbread came out. By the end of the week, that tin held a layered history of everything cooked, and it was the starting fat for nearly everything baked. Bacon grease keeps baked goods from sticking in a way butter never can. The smoke point is higher, the flavor deeper, and the way it coats seasoned cast iron before baking creates a seal that Crisco or spray oil cannot replicate. African American families across the South carried this practice from the 19th century straight through the 1970s. The ones who kept their tin long after health trends said otherwise. Their cornbread tasted different, richer, like something had been built into it slowly over years, because it had. Couscous was a Creole cornmeal dish that stretched a handful of meal into a hearty breakfast for an entire family. Black cooks in Louisiana and along the Gulf Coast stirred cornmeal into a skillet with hot water, forming small lumps that fried until crispy on the outside while staying soft within. The dish was served swimming in milk or clabber, sometimes sweetened with cane syrup or eaten savory with crumbled bacon. The name itself came from West African languages, connecting this humble dish to ancestral cooking traditions that survived the Middle Passage. Couscous required minimal ingredients and cooked quickly over low heat, making it ideal for mornings when time and fuel were both precious. Children ate it before school, laborers carried it cold to the fields, and elders remembered it as the taste of home and heritage combined. Dandelion green scramble was a breakfast that came from the yard when the pantry had nothing left. Dandelion greens, dismissed as weeds by those who could afford better, were gathered fresh and sautéed with onions and lard. Eggs were cracked over the wilted greens and scrambled together, creating a plate that was both bitter and rich. The greens provided vitamins badly needed after long winters of preserved food, and the eggs added protein to carry bodies through hard mornings. For families with no money for store-bought vegetables, foraging was not a choice but a necessity. Children might not have loved the bitterness, but they grew up with it as part of their routine. Elders passed down knowledge of which wild plants were safe and how to prepare them. Dandelion green scramble was resilience pulled directly from the soil. Collard greens with ham hocks simmered for hours on the back of wood stoves, filling African American homes with the smell of smoky pork and tender greens. Fresh collards were stripped from their tough stems, washed repeatedly to remove grit, then piled into large pots with ham hocks that had been bargained for at the butcher. The greens cooked down dramatically, releasing their vitamins into the cooking liquid while absorbing the salty, smoky essence of the pork. By the time they reached the table, the greens were silky and rich, the ham hocks falling apart at the touch of a fork. During wartime rationing, this dish provided essential vitamins and minerals that kept families healthy through lean months. The pot liquor left behind was never wasted. It was sipped from cups or soaked up with cornbread. Collard greens represented Sunday dinner, holiday tables, and everyday nourishment all at once. Children who grew up eating them carried the taste into adulthood, forever linking the dish to memories of home. Before smoothies and detox juices, your grandmother was soaking sliced okra in water overnight and drinking it first thing in the morning. She called it something for the stomach. The mucilage, that thick, slippery substance most people avoid, was the point. It coated the digestive tract, slowed sugar absorption, and fed beneficial gut bacteria. West African communities had used okra medicinally for centuries, and Katie Arbery, a formerly enslaved woman interviewed through the Federal Writers Project, credited weeks of okra soup with saving her life during a severe illness. The plant came from the Horn of Africa, where the Angolan word ki ngombo gave English the word gumbo. A glass of okra water carried fiber, vitamin C, folate, and magnesium. It cost nothing and worked quietly, the way the old remedies always did. Every family had an opinion about chow chow, and every opinion was that theirs was the only correct recipe. The arguments could outlast the relish.
Souse, also known as head cheese, was a dish created from the parts of the animal most people overlooked. Pig heads were boiled for hours, extracting every bit of meat, then mixed with vinegar and seasonings before being set into a gelatinous loaf. It was sliced and eaten cold, often with bread or pickles, providing protein in an inexpensive form. African American families adopted souse as part of their cooking tradition, making sure no part of the hog went to waste. It may sound unappealing to modern tastes, but to past generations, it was a valuable way to preserve and stretch meat. The vinegar gave it a tangy bite that cut through its richness, making it flavorful despite humble origins. For communities where every scrap mattered, souse was both survival and ingenuity. It carried forward lessons of thrift and resourcefulness, binding families to traditions that honored the animal fully. Forgotten now, it remains part of a legacy of making something meaningful out of little.
Buttermilk pralines were the southern candy that used tangy buttermilk to create something resembling expensive New Orleans confections at a fraction of the cost. Sugar and buttermilk were boiled together until reaching softball stage, then beaten with butter and vanilla until the mixture turned creamy and thick. Spoonfuls were dropped onto wax paper where they spread into patties with slightly grainy texture and deep caramel flavor. The buttermilk added tanginess that balanced the sweetness and helped the candy set properly. Pecans were added when available, though plain pralines satisfied perfectly well during lean times. Buttermilk was cheap since it was often the byproduct of butter making that families did at home. The pralines proved fancy candy was possible without fancy ingredients or expensive nuts.
Blackberry cobbler without sugar proved that fruit's natural sweetness could create desserts when refined sugar wasn't available. Wild blackberries grew abundantly along fence lines and in abandoned fields, free for anyone willing to brave thorns and summer heat to pick them. Black families sent children out with buckets, returning with purple-stained hands and enough berries to make cobblers that lasted days. The berries were cooked down until their juices concentrated, natural sugars intensifying without any additions. Simple biscuit dough made from flour, lard, and buttermilk was dropped over the bubbling fruit, then baked until golden. The result was tart and intense, less sweet than modern desserts, but deeply satisfying in ways sugar-laden versions never achieve. These cobblers appeared at church socials and family gatherings, proof that celebration didn't require money. Women competed quietly over whose cobbler turned out best, pride coming from skill rather than expensive ingredients. The practice of picking wild berries taught children about seasons, patience, and finding abundance in nature with steadfast pride.
Fried rabbit appeared on 1930s Black Christmas tables as a protein that cost nothing but time, skill, and the knowledge of where to find them. Boys learned to set snares and check trap lines in the weeks before Christmas, bringing home rabbits that would become the centerpiece of holiday dinner. The rabbits were cleaned, soaked in salt water to draw out blood, then cut into pieces and soaked again in buttermilk to tenderize the lean meat. Dredged in seasoned flour and fried slowly in lard until golden brown and crackling crisp, fried rabbit rivaled chicken in flavor while costing not a single penny. The meat was firm but tender with a slightly sweet, mild taste that children loved. Families who lived near woods or fields could count on rabbit when nothing else was certain, making it a reliable Christmas tradition during uncertain times. Fried rabbit represented self-sufficiency, the ability to feed your family through skill rather than money, and the dignity of providing something special through your own effort.
Smoked ham steaks were the weeknight luxury that became Christmas tradition when whole hams cost more than budgets allowed. Thick slices of smoked ham were fried in cast iron skillets until the edges caramelized and the fat rendered into crispy ribbons. Some cooks glazed them with brown sugar and pineapple juice, creating sticky sweetness that balanced the salt. Ham steaks cost far less per pound than whole hams, yet delivered the same smoky flavor families associated with holiday celebration. They cooked quickly, making them practical for busy Christmas mornings when ovens were occupied with other dishes. Children loved the crispy edges, while adults appreciated the economy. Smoked ham steaks proved that celebration didn't require spending beyond your means, just knowing how to make affordable cuts shine.
Number 29, hoe cakes cooked on the vestibule stove. When the dining car shut for the night, porters slipped down to the coal stove that heated the vestibule and dropped a spoon of cornmeal batter onto the hot iron lid. Hoe cakes were field food brought north by their fathers from Mississippi and Alabama, and they cost almost nothing. A cup of meal, a pinch of soda, water from the porter's washroom tap. The smell carried into the sleeper berths, and white passengers would sometimes ask what was cooking. Porters always said nothing. By the time the train hit St. Louis, the hoe cakes were folded into a handkerchief and eaten standing up. They were the closest thing a working man had to home cooking between Chicago and New Orleans. Pot liquor was the dark, trembling broth left in the bottom of the pot after the greens had cooked down. Collards or turnips simmered all afternoon with a ham bone. Nobody poured it out. That liquid held vitamins and minerals that nothing else on the table could match in winter. You tore cornbread and held it over the pot until it could absorb no more, then ate it standing. Chef Lachelle Cunningham, writing in the Minnesota Spokesman Recorder in 2026, called pot liquor the teacher, the nutrient-rich broth that people who didn't understand threw away. The West African tradition of saving and drinking cooking liquid crossed the ocean and landed in every black kitchen in the South. Her hands knew what to do with it. The ones who came after her, who grew up with store-bought broth and running water, mostly stopped knowing. Syrup sandwiches were among the most iconic survival lunches in African American households, requiring nothing more than bread and thick molasses or sorghum. Families spread dark syrup generously between slices of whatever bread was available, creating a meal that was sweet, filling, and cost almost nothing. The syrup provided quick energy through natural sugars, while bread offered carbohydrates to sustain workers and children through long hours. In rural southern communities, sorghum was often homemade from stalks grown in family gardens, making this lunch essentially free. Children carried these sandwiches to school wrapped in cloth, eating them at midday without shame because everyone understood survival. The sweetness masked what was essentially poverty, transforming scarcity into something children actually looked forward to eating. The secret was a teaspoon of white vinegar worked into the dough just before the water went in, and most people who hadn't grown up in these kitchens had never heard of it. The chemistry is straightforward. Gluten develops when flour proteins are hydrated and agitated, and gluten is what makes pastry tough rather than flaky. Vinegar is a mild acid, and acid inhibits gluten formation, meaning a small amount added to pie dough actively resists the toughening that handling usually causes. African American bakers in the South incorporated this by at least the 1930s and 40s, passed down through women who made pies from scratch every week and had figured out by feel what the science would later confirm. Some combined the vinegar with a tablespoon of ice-cold vodka for an even more tender crust. Alcohol inhibits gluten even more aggressively than acid alone, and it evaporates cleanly in the oven without leaving flavor behind. You didn't need to understand any of that. You just needed to have watched someone do it once. Neck bone and rice transformed discarded pork bones into a meal of surprising richness and depth. Butchers sold neck bones for almost nothing because the meat was sparse and bones were considered waste by those who could afford better cuts. Black cooks knew that slow simmering would coax every bit of flavor from these bones, creating broth that turned plain rice into something deeply satisfying. The neck bones were browned first, then covered with water and simmered for hours with onions and garlic. The small bits of meat clinging to bones became tender enough to fall away, while marrow enriched the cooking liquid into something approaching gravy. Rice was cooked directly in this flavorful broth, absorbing every bit of pork essence. Families gathered around bowls, picking bones clean and savoring every morsel. Blackstrap molasses milk was a simple morning drink that filled empty stomachs when there was nothing else to eat. A mug of warm milk was stirred with a spoonful of blackstrap molasses until it turned dark and sweet, creating a drink that was nourishing and cheap. Blackstrap was the least expensive sweetener available, packed with iron, calcium, and minerals that families desperately needed. Children drank it before school, to keep their energy steady, while adults relied on it before heading out to labor. The taste was bold and deep, with a sweetness that lingered longer than plain milk. It required no cooking and could be made even when the pantry held almost nothing. For households stretched thin by the Depression, this drink was a quiet lifeline that provided both calories and comfort at almost no cost. Sawmill gravy earned its name from lumber camps, where workers needed cheap, filling food to fuel backbreaking labor. African American cooks perfected this dish using pan drippings, flour, milk or water, salt, and generous black pepper that gave the gravy its distinctive speckled appearance. The technique was simple but required skill, whisking constantly to prevent lumps while building flavor from whatever meat had been fried beforehand. Poured over biscuits, the gravy transformed plain bread into something substantial enough to carry a family through hours of work. During the 1940s, when meat was rationed and dairy sometimes scarce, sawmill gravy stretched resources brilliantly. A single pan of fried fatback could produce enough drippings for gravy that fed an entire family. The pepper wasn't just flavoring, it made the gravy seem more substantial and satisfying. This was working class food that acknowledged hardship while refusing to surrender to it. Most people today buy turnips or turnip greens. Your grandmother bought neither. She pulled the whole plant and used everything. The root went into soups, providing starch, vitamin C, and fiber. The tops went straight into the greens pot, delivering iron, calcium, and vitamin K that rivaled anything else in the garden. 2 complete foods from a single plant, and the cost was 1 seed packet and a little rain. During the Depression and through the 1940s, turnips were among the most reliable crops in black gardens. Hardy enough to survive frost, fast enough to harvest in 60 days. The root water became broth. The greens became supper. She did not think of it as 2 separate vegetables. It was 1 gift from 1 seed, and she used every piece. That refusal to see anything as disposable fed families when nothing else could.
Pea hull soup was one of those recipes that revealed just how little went to waste in African American kitchens. The hulls of peas, often discarded by others, were simmered slowly to extract every bit of flavor and nourishment. The broth was sometimes thickened with cornmeal or enriched with bits of onion, fat, or herbs if available. It was not a dish of luxury, but it carried the spirit of making something from nothing. For enslaved people and later generations living in poverty, pea hull soup was proof that even scraps could sustain life. Children grew up on it, learning the lesson that food was too precious to waste. The flavor was earthy and simple, yet it filled stomachs and carried strength. It represented resilience, care, and the power of resourcefulness in hard times. Forgotten now, pea hull soup once stood as a quiet but powerful part of African American survival and heritage.
Blackstrap gingerbread was the dark, dense cake that turned the cheapest molasses into Christmas celebration throughout black households. Blackstrap, The final pressing with strongest flavor cost less than lighter grades and gave gingerbread intense depth. The batter combined molasses with flour, ginger, cinnamon, cloves, and whatever fat was available, then baked into loaves or sheet cakes. The finished gingerbread was almost black, deeply spiced and moist enough to last for days. Some families topped it with powdered sugar glaze, while others served it plain with coffee. Blackstrap gingerbread appeared at Christmas because spices were traditional holiday flavors, even when nothing else was affordable. The cake proved that the cheapest ingredients created the most memorable flavors.
Onion skin tea was one of those old remedies that could quiet both body and soul. When someone had a cough or a fever, or when food simply ran out, a pot of this humble tea came to the rescue. Dried onion skins were gathered from the corners of the kitchen, rinsed and steeped in boiling water until the liquid turned golden brown. The scent was sharp but comforting, a mix of earth and sweetness that filled the air with warmth. Some added honey if they had it, or a squeeze of lemon, but even plain, it had its own charm. People believed it could heal and strengthen, and maybe it did, because hope itself can be medicine. Onion skin tea was born from patience, brewed by hands that knew how to stretch every last bit of life from what they had. It was the taste of resilience and care, a sip that made you believe tomorrow might be gentler.
Cornmeal dressing replaced traditional bread stuffing in 1930s Black Christmas kitchens when wheat flour prices climbed beyond reach. Cornbread was crumbled days ahead and left to dry, then combined with sautéed onions, celery from the garden, sage, and whatever drippings could be saved. The mixture was moistened with pot liquor or broth, packed into baking pans, and baked until the top turned golden and crusty while the inside stayed moist. Some families added giblets or oysters when available, but most kept it simple and let the cornbread's earthy sweetness carry the dish. Cornmeal dressing appeared alongside whatever protein the family could manage, chicken, rabbit, or wild game, stretching the meal further while providing filling satisfaction. Children loved the crispy corner pieces best, fighting over them at the table. The dish represented practical wisdom, using cheap and available ingredients to create something festive. Cornmeal dressing proved Christmas flavor came from care and seasoning, not expensive ingredients.
Turkey wings and gravy were the 1970s answer to expensive whole turkeys, stretching holiday budgets while delivering all the flavor families craved. Wings were seasoned with garlic powder, onion powder, paprika, salt, and pepper, then browned in hot oil until the skin crisped golden. The wings were transferred to roasting pans, covered with rich gravy made from drippings and broth, then baked until the meat fell from the bone. Mothers bought wings by the flat since they cost a fraction of whole birds, yet fed families generously. The gravy soaked into rice or dressing, making every bite feel like celebration. Turkey wings appeared on Christmas tables throughout Black neighborhoods, proving that smart shopping created feasts rivaling any expensive spread.
Number 26, sardines and soda crackers. A tin of sardines cost about 5 cents in 1930, and a sleeve of soda crackers cost 3. For under a dime, a Pullman porter could feed himself between Memphis and Cincinnati without setting foot in the white dining car. The tin opened with a key that doubled as a souvenir, and the oil from the fish soaked the crackers into something almost soft. Porters ate it sitting on the stairs of the baggage car, knees together, careful not to stain the trouser crease. It was an immigrant's meal, turned Black working man's meal, turned railroad meal. It traveled well, never spoiled, and asked nothing of the man eating it. The empty tin went into the pail's bottom pocket on the return trip, useful for nails, buttons, or the small change a porter set aside for his daughter's school shoes once the run was done. Rabbit was what you ate when the hog was gone and the beans were low and someone had set traps the evening before. Wild-caught cottontail, historically documented as slave food from the era when enslaved people supplemented rations by hunting small game near the quarters, stayed on the table in black households well into the 1920s. The preparation, jointed, soaked overnight in salted water to draw out any gaminess, then browned hard in lard, set aside while onion cooked down in the same pan, then everything back in together with just enough water to reach halfway up the pieces, lid on, fire low for an hour. What remained was a dark, sweet, savory onion gravy thick enough to pour over rice. You'd never know from the taste what it cost. Almost nothing in money and a morning and the knowledge of how to set a trap. Her father had taught her, she hadn't taught anyone. By the time her children were grown, there was a grocery 2 towns over and the trap stayed in the shed. Cold biscuits with preserves provided sweet lunches made from breakfast leftovers and home canned fruit. Families baked biscuits in the morning, setting aside extras for midday meals. These were split and spread with whatever preserves the pantry held, often blackberry, peach, or fig jam made from fruit gathered in season. The biscuits were denser cold than fresh, but preserves added moisture and sweetness that made them satisfying. Children carried these, wrapped in cloth, eating them at school while dreaming of summer days spent picking berries. The preserves represented hours of labor, harvesting and canning fruit that would otherwise rot. Together, biscuit and jam cost almost nothing, but delivered comfort that felt like abundance. This lunch connected daily sustenance to seasonal rhythms. The difference between a good custard pie and a great one often came down to a single small can. Evaporated milk from the shelf with the 2 punched holes in the top was not a shortcut in African American kitchens. It was a deliberate choice. Regular milk carries too much water, and in a custard filling, that excess dilutes the proteins that need to set the pie firm. The result weeps liquid into the crust and won't slice clean. Evaporated milk has had roughly 60% of its water removed, concentrating the proteins and milk sugars until it's nearly twice as rich. African American bakers adopted it in custard pies, sweet potato, chess, buttermilk, coconut, from at least the 1930s onward, when canned goods became staples in rural Southern households that couldn't count on fresh dairy every week. The silkier texture, the clean edge when cut, none of that came from talent alone. It came from knowing what was in the can and exactly why it worked better than what came out of the bottle. Blackstrap molasses, Johnny cakes combined 2 of the cheapest ingredients into griddle cakes that provided iron, energy, and comfort in every bite. Blackstrap molasses, the darkest byproduct of sugar refining, cost almost nothing because producers considered it waste. Black families knew its value, stirring it into cornmeal batter to create Johnny cakes with deep, almost bitter sweetness that refined sugar could never match. These griddle cakes were fried on cast iron until golden, served hot with more molasses, drizzled on top, or eaten plain as portable breakfast. The iron content helped prevent anemia in children and pregnant women when meat was scarce. This dish represented the alchemy of poverty cooking, transforming industrial byproducts into nourishment that sustained families through hard times. Sorghum syrup biscuits carried the taste of the rural South into every morning they were served. Biscuits were made from flour, lard, and buttermilk, shaped by hand and baked in cast iron until golden. Sorghum syrup, darker and earthier than sugar, was poured generously over the hot bread, soaking into the soft centers and pooling on the plate. The syrup came from tall cane stalks, pressed and boiled down into thick sweetness that families made themselves or bought from neighbors. During the Depression, when jams and refined sugar were out of reach, sorghum became the sweetener of choice across Black communities. Children loved the sticky richness, while adults valued how little it cost to fill a plate. The biscuits were eaten quickly before heading to fields, the sweetness giving brief comfort before the long day ahead. Fatback and cornmeal gravy was the foundation of countless wartime breakfasts in African American households across the rural South. When meat was rationed and money tight, families sliced thin pieces of salted pork fat and rendered them slowly in cast iron until the edges crisped and the fat turned liquid gold. That precious lard became the base for thick, peppery gravy made by whisking in cornmeal and water until it bubbled into something hearty. The gravy was poured over biscuits, rice, or whatever starch the family had, transforming simple ingredients into something that stuck to ribs and fueled long days of labor. Children ate it before school, knowing the richness would carry them through morning lessons. Adults relied on it before heading to factories, fields, or domestic service jobs. This wasn't fancy cooking. It was survival wisdom passed from mother to daughter. The dish cost almost nothing, yet delivered comfort that money couldn't buy. Poke salad to the people who picked it, was one of the most nutrient-dense wild greens in the South, but only if you harvested the youngest shoots in early spring before the stems turned purple and the leaves thickened with poison. The preparation required exact knowledge. Boil the young leaves, pour off the water, boil again, pour off again, then fry them with bacon grease and onions. This double boiling method lived in no cookbook. It passed hand to hand, mother to daughter, and getting it wrong meant real trouble. Families who foraged poke salad each spring were eating leaves rich in vitamins A and C, iron and calcium, free food growing where most people walk past without noticing. Knowing when to pick and how to cook, it was survival literacy that separated those close to the land from everyone else.
Raccoon may sound unusual to modern ears, but in rural African American communities, it was a common and practical dish. Hunting was an important way to supplement diets when money or access to meat was limited, and raccoon provided a reliable source of protein. The meat was cleaned carefully, often soaked to reduce its strong flavor, then seasoned and baked slowly until tender. Families would serve it with root vegetables or cornbread, turning what some might see as wild game into a hearty family meal. It was not considered exotic or strange at the time. It was simply another way to make use of what the land provided. Children grew up eating raccoon without second thought, knowing it was part of the rhythm of survival. For many, it carried the taste of the woods, a reminder that food could always be found if you knew where to look. Forgotten now, baked raccoon was once a vital dish that showed ingenuity in the face of scarcity.
Vinegar taffy was the Depression candy, proving sweetness could be stretched from the most basic pantry staples imaginable. Sugar and vinegar were boiled together until the mixture reached hard crack stage, creating candy both sweet and tangy. The hot syrup was poured onto greased surfaces, cooled slightly, then pulled repeatedly until it turned opaque and chewy. The vinegar prevented crystallization and added bright, sharp flavor, cutting through the sweetness perfectly. Children loved pulling the taffy, competing to see who could stretch it longest without breaking. The finished candy was twisted into ropes and cut into pieces lasting weeks in jars. Vinegar taffy cost almost nothing, requiring only 2 ingredients most families already had.
Cowpea and collard stew combined 2 powerhouse ingredients that sustained countless families through hard times. Field peas, also known as cowpeas, were simmered slowly with smoky meat and joined by hearty collard greens, creating a dish rich in protein, vitamins, and earthy flavor. The long cooking process filled homes with an aroma that signaled comfort and nourishment. Farmers valued cowpeas for their ability to thrive in poor soil, while collards offered leaves long after other vegetables had withered. Together, they made a meal that cost little but fed many, reflecting a tradition of resourcefulness and care. Mothers and grandmothers seasoned the pot with onions, garlic, and pepper, each adding a personal touch passed down through generations. Families gathered around the table with slices of cornbread to soak up the flavorful broth, finding strength in every spoonful. Though supermarkets now offer endless choices, the slow-simmered union of cowpeas and collards stands as a reminder of a time when simple ingredients created enduring nourishment. Wild onion and garlic mix was both food and medicine, gathered by those who knew the land as well as any healer. In damp meadows and riverbanks, the green shoots sprouted freely, filling baskets with flavor when rations tasted dull or stale. Boiled into soups or pounded into paste, the bulbs masked bitterness and helped fight colds or fever. Their strong scent filled the air, signaling nourishment in a place where it was often scarce. The people who gathered them worked quietly at dawn, plucking the roots from the earth, grateful for the sharp fragrance that promised vitality. When boiled with beans or greens, these humble plants gave meals depth and warmth, reminding people of home, of something green and alive. Mixing wild onion and garlic with beans or greens brought a comfort that was small but deeply human, the warmth of a familiar taste. These foraged bulbs were proof that knowledge was power, and survival often depended on remembering the wisdom that nature whispered to those willing to listen. In every bowl, seasoned this way, lived both healing and defiance, the flavor of life persisting despite deprivation, a small spark of dignity and strength hidden in every spoonful.
Congealed cranberry salad was the jiggly showpiece that graced 1970s soul food Christmas tables with festive red color and tang. Cranberry sauce was mixed with flavored gelatin, crushed pineapple, celery, and pecans, then poured into molds and chilled until firm. The unmolded salad wobbled dramatically when carried to the table, drawing attention from guests. The combination of tart cranberries with sweet gelatin created complexity that cut through rich meats. Canned cranberry sauce cost little and stretched further when combined with other ingredients. The mold could be made days ahead, freeing oven space on Christmas. Congealed salads represented the 1970s love of creative presentation and make-ahead convenience. The cranberry version proved holiday traditions could be both practical and impressive.
Number 30, cold cornbread wrapped in wax paper. Every porter's run began with a square of yesterday's cornbread tucked against the lining of the tin pail. It was the cheapest food a black household in Chicago or Atlanta could send a working man out the door with, and it was the most reliable. Wives baked it in cast iron the night before, cut it into bricks, and wrapped each piece in wax paper so the crumbs stayed off the starched jacket. By 1928, a porter on the Panama Limited could go 16 hours between proper meals, and the cornbread was what kept him standing through the second shift. He ate it dry, leaning against the vestibule door, sometimes with a sliver of cured pork pressed inside like a pocket. Nothing about it was special. That was the whole point. Guinea hens ran loose in yards across the rural black South, and anyone who kept them knew they weren't pets. They were the insurance policy. Soul food historians document that enslaved people of West Central African origin cooked guinea fowl with rice exactly as their forebears had. The bird jointed and browned hard in iron, then covered with water and root vegetables and pulled to a long, low simmer. Into the 1920s, black households still stewed guinea hen the old way. Onion, turnip, sweet potato in the pot, 2 hours low until the meat left the bone. The broth had a richness chicken couldn't match, darker, more complex, telling you plainly that this bird had lived outside, had eaten bugs and grass, and moved under its own power. That broth poured over rice, and the bowl came back to the pot for more. Souse meat sandwiches used the jellied pork that resulted from boiling pig feet, ears, and other scraps with vinegar and spices. The meat was picked from bones, mixed with natural gelatin, and pressed into loaves that could be sliced for sandwiches. The flavor was tangy and rich, the texture somewhere between firm and soft. Families made souse after hog killings, preserving parts that would otherwise go to waste. The vinegar acted as preservative, allowing the meat to last for weeks in cool cellars or ice boxes. Workers carried souse sandwiches, knowing the protein would sustain them through demanding labor. The taste was distinctive, not for everyone, but deeply satisfying for those who grew up eating it. Souse represented the nose-to-tail philosophy that defined Black foodways. Nobody who grew up in one of these kitchens ever saw a measuring cup used for measuring, a palm of flour, a pour of buttermilk that looked right against the bowl, a pinch of salt tested between two fingers. This was precision of a different kind, built over years of baking the same things in the same cast iron until the hands knew more than any card could say. In West African culinary tradition, cooking by ratio and feel rather than fixed measurement was standard practice for centuries, and it traveled with the Great Migration into northern kitchens that had never heard of it. The trick is understanding relationships, not amounts. More fat means more tenderness, more acid means more rise. The women who never needed to write anything down had memorized chemistry without calling it that, and if you were lucky enough to stand beside one long enough, she handed you something no recipe card can hold. Red bean porridge was a humble bowl of sustenance that stretched a handful of dried beans into meals for an entire week. Black families soaked red beans overnight, then simmered them slowly with onion and garlic until the beans broke down into thick, creamy mush. The porridge was served hot over rice or with cornbread, providing complete protein that rivaled expensive meat. This dish traced its roots to West African cooking traditions, where beans and grains formed the foundation of daily meals. During the Depression, red bean porridge kept children fed when grocery money ran short. Mothers added a small piece of salt pork when possible, stretching the meat's flavor through the entire batch. The porridge could be reheated for days, growing thicker and more flavorful with each warming. Cornmeal mush with molasses was one of the most common breakfasts in Black households during the 1930s, eaten by families who had little else to start the day. Cornmeal was simmered slowly in water until it thickened into a dense porridge, then served hot with a heavy pour of dark molasses for sweetness. The dish cost almost nothing, since cornmeal could be bought in bulk for pennies, and molasses was cheaper than sugar across the South. Children ate it before walking to school, while adults relied on it to fuel long days of labor. Some families added milk when they could afford it, but most ate it plain with just the syrup on top. The texture was thick and heavy, meant to sit in the stomach and keep hunger away for hours. Cornmeal mush with molasses was survival in a bowl, quiet and enduring. Salmon croquettes transformed canned fish into crispy golden patties that made weeknight dinners feel special during wartime rationing. Canned salmon, affordable and shelf-stable, was mashed with breadcrumbs, egg, onion, and whatever seasonings the pantry held, then shaped into patties and fried until crusty outside and tender within. The fish's natural oils kept the croquettes moist, while the breadcrumb coating provided satisfying crunch. African American families served them with rice and gravy, stretching one can of salmon into a meal that fed everyone. During the 1940s, when fresh fish was scarce and meat rationed, canned salmon became a protein staple that didn't require refrigeration. Mothers passed down their particular techniques. Some added celery, others a splash of hot sauce, creating family recipes that varied from kitchen to kitchen. Children often preferred croquettes to plain fish because the crispy exterior made them feel like a treat. Salmon croquettes proved that pantry staples could become something worth anticipating. They ate the whole thing. The flesh was summer's sweetest reward, hydrating, full of lycopene and vitamins A and C, but the seeds and the rind carried the real nutrition. Roasted watermelon seeds packed protein, magnesium, iron, and zinc. In West Africa, where the melon originated as the vine Citrullus lanatus, seeds were dried and ground into flour. The rind was pickled in vinegar and spices, creating a crunchy preserve that supported digestion through winter. Pickled watermelon rind sat in jars alongside chow chow and pickled beets, part of a fermentation tradition that kept families nourished year-round. Eating every part was not poverty. It was a food system designed to waste nothing and extract everything. Now the seeds get spit out, the rind goes in the trash, and a fruit that ancestors cultivated across the world gets reduced to a single pink bite.
Goober pea stew was a dish with roots tracing directly back to West Africa, where peanuts were long a staple. In African American kitchens, peanuts, called goober peas, were simmered with vegetables, spices, and sometimes scraps of meat to create a thick, hearty stew. It was affordable, nourishing, and rich in protein, perfect for families making the most of limited supplies. The stew's flavor carried warmth and earthiness, with peanuts giving body and depth to simple ingredients. For enslaved people, it was a way to preserve traditions under impossible circumstances, blending African flavors with what was available in the Americas. Later generations continued cooking goober pea stew, especially in rural southern communities, where it was shared at gatherings and remembered as a food of both struggle and comfort. It spoke of cultural memory, resilience, and adaptation, proof that African roots remained strong across oceans and generations. Forgotten by many, it once symbolized the creativity of making abundance from scarcity.
Parched peanut brittle was the Christmas candy requiring nothing but peanuts, sugar, and patience over a hot stove. Peanuts grown in backyard gardens were roasted until fragrant, then folded into caramelized sugar and poured thin on degreased surfaces. The mixture hardened into sheets that shattered into golden shards, delivering satisfying crunch, followed by rich, roasted flavor. Making brittle required careful attention since the sugar could burn in seconds. But experienced cooks knew exactly when to pull the pot from heat. The candy stored well in tins, making it ideal for gift-giving when money was scarce. Parched peanut brittle proved that homegrown ingredients, transformed by skill, could rival any store-bought confection, bringing pride to families with nothing but determination.
Cornmeal sacks were as essential as breathing, and every family knew it. Cornmeal was cheap, filling, and dependable, something you could use in a dozen different ways without wasting a single grain. Families used it for cornbread that stretched a pot of beans, hoe cakes cooked right on the stovetop, dumplings dropped into broth, and even as a thickener when soups needed to last another day, the sacks sat in corners of pantries, tied tight to keep pests out, often lasting weeks at a time because people used cornmeal daily. Kids learned early how to scoop it with steady hands. Knowing a little went a long way. Cornmeal was the base of survival cooking, humble but mighty. It kept families full when nothing else was guaranteed, proving that simple food could be powerful when stretched with skill and love.
7-Up cake was the moist pound cake that used lemon lime soda as its secret ingredient, creating tender crumb and subtle citrus flavor. Butter, sugar, and eggs were creamed together, then flour and 7-Up were added alternately until the batter turned smooth and light. The soda's carbonation made the cake rise beautifully, while its citrus notes perfumed each slice. Baked in a bundt pan and glazed with powdered sugar icing, the cake looked impressive enough for any Christmas table. The recipe spread through Black communities via word of mouth, each baker adding personal touches. Some added lemon extract for brighter flavor, while others kept it simple. 7-Up cake proved that ingenuity with everyday ingredients created memorable desserts. The cake became a 1970s classic that families still request today.
Number 18, apple hand pies sold to porters at division stops. Black women along the route ran small kitchens near the rail yards in towns like Greenwood and Vicksburg, and they sold apple hand pies wrapped in newsprint for a nickel apiece. The dough was rendered lard and flour. The filling was windfall apples cooked down with brown sugar. Porters bought them through the open Dutch door during the 5-minute stop, dropping the coin into a calloused hand and tucking the warm pie inside the tin pail beside the cold meal already there. Some women ran the same stand for 30 years and put their children through school on those nickels. The pie was eaten by lantern light an hour later, the crust shattering down the porter's lapel. A black economy ran alongside the Pullman line, and almost nobody outside it ever saw the books. In the 1920s, a head of cabbage cost 3 cents. When the sharecropper account came up short and the family had nothing on credit, that 3-cent head was supper. Thick-cut, salt-cured fatback went into the iron skillet first to render and flavor the oil. Then in went rough-cut cabbage with just enough water to prevent scorching, lit on low for 20 minutes. Salt, black pepper, a splash of apple cider vinegar at the end to cut the richness. 6 people could eat from one skillet for 3 cents and go to bed full. She made it at least once a week, in a bad month, twice. And nobody said a word because the smell of fatback releasing into that hot pan was the kind of comfort that reached you before you even cleared the yard and came through the door. Tomato sandwiches celebrated summer's abundance when gardens produced more ripe tomatoes than families could eat fresh. Thick slices of red tomato were layered between bread, spread with mayonnaise and sprinkled with salt and pepper. The juice soaked into bread, creating a messy but deeply satisfying lunch that tasted like summer itself. Families ate these constantly during tomato season, knowing fresh abundance would disappear with the first frost. The simplicity was the point because perfectly ripe tomatoes needed nothing more than bread and salt to become memorable. Children helped pick tomatoes and learned to appreciate how gardens could feed families. These sandwiches couldn't travel far because juice made bread soggy, but eaten fresh, they represented everything good about growing your own food. The biscuits demanded improvisation, and the tool was already on the table. In nearly every African-American kitchen from the 1930s through the 1960s, there was a wide, heavy drinking glass with a second job nobody discussed. It just was the biscuit cutter, used so long that a faint ring of flour had worn into the rim. You press straight down, never twisted. Twisting seals the cut edges and prevents the layers from rising, and the glass left a clean circle that baked into exactly the size that kitchen had always made. The no twist rule is technical. A clean edge lets steam escape straight up through the open layers, creating the visible separation you can pull apart with your hands. The glass had the right rim. The woman pressing it knew the physics, even if she never used that word. Bone marrow spread turned the insides of discarded bones into a rich, buttery topping that elevated plain bread into something special. Black families roasted large beef or pork bones until the marrow softened, then scooped out the creamy centers and spread them on cornbread or biscuits while still warm. The marrow had a silky texture and deep, meaty flavor that cost nothing since butchers gave away bones. This spread provided essential fats and nutrients when butter was unaffordable and meat was reserved for Sunday. Children watched as mothers cracked bones and extracted every bit of marrow, learning that valuable food often hid inside what others threw away. The spread was sometimes mixed with salt and herbs, stretched further across more bread. Bone marrow represented the ultimate no-waste philosophy of survival cooking. Fried fish rolled with onions was a breakfast reflecting the close ties Black communities had with rivers and local fishing. Roast sacks were cleaned, seasoned with salt and pepper, then pan-fried and lard until firm and golden. Onions were fried alongside, their sweetness balancing the rich, dense flavor of the roe. The combination was eaten hot with cornbread or biscuits, making a plate that was hearty and packed with protein. For families near waterways, roe was an affordable catch that supplemented diets when store-bought meat was out of reach. It was not glamorous, but it was reliable and nourishing when every source of food mattered. Children grew up with it as a familiar part of mornings, while adults valued how little it cost. Fried fish, rolled with onions, was quiet proof that rivers could feed families as well as farms. Crackling cornbread pones were hand-shaped cakes that combined two Southern staples into something greater than either ingredient alone. Cornmeal batter was mixed with crispy cracklings left from rendering lard, shaped into oval pones by hand, and baked until crusty outside and tender within. Each bite delivered cornbread's comfort, punctuated by pockets of salty, crunchy pork that burst with flavor. During the 1940s, when hog killing season provided families with fresh cracklings, these pones appeared on tables throughout winter months. The shape mattered. Pones baked differently than skillet cornbread, developing more crust and a denser interior that traveled well in lunch pails. Children carried them to school, eating them cold at midday when hot food wasn't possible. The cracklings provided fat and protein that plain cornbread lacked, making each pone a more complete food. This was resourcefulness shaped by hand, baked until golden. Benny seeds arrived in South Carolina around 1730, carried by West Africans who had cultivated sesame for centuries. They believed scattering the seeds across a doorway brought luck to the household and kept ants from crossing the threshold. In the kitchens of the enslaved, Benny went everywhere, toasted over greens, pressed into wafers with sugar, ground into stews, baked into bread. Thomas Jefferson recorded how enslaved people at Monticello prepared stews and sesame pudding from these tiny seeds. Packed with calcium, iron, zinc, and protein, a handful of toasted Ben over rice turned a simple plate into fuel for a full day. The Gullah Geechee communities of the Sea Islands kept Ben traditions alive longest, pressing them into brittle candies sold at roadside stands and cooking wafers that cracked like thin glass between your teeth. Most people reach for tahini now without knowing they are eating the seed that carried their ancestors through generations of forced labor and quiet daily resistance.
Egg pie was one of those clever recipes that turned almost nothing into something sweet, filling, and comforting. It was a custard-like pie made with eggs, milk, and whatever sugar could be spared, though during times of scarcity, molasses or syrup often took the place of refined sugar. The pie baked into a golden, slightly firm custard with a texture somewhere between flan and cake, rich yet simple. Families loved it because it felt like a true dessert, even though it relied on the most basic pantry staples. Enslaved people and their descendants carried recipes like this forward, proving that resourcefulness was its own kind of art. Egg pie was especially common in rural communities where eggs were plentiful, but luxuries like cream were rare. Each bite carried a reminder of survival and the ability to create joy from limited means. It was not just about sweetness, but about finding dignity in daily life. Over time, it became a Sunday treat, something shared after church or made for gatherings. Forgotten today, egg pie once stood as a symbol of perseverance and ingenuity.
Sorghum pie was the Depression answer to pecan pie. using pantry staples to create something rich when expensive ingredients were impossible. A filling of sorghum syrup, eggs, butter, and vanilla was poured into homemade crust and baked until set. The flavor was deep and earthy, less sweet than corn syrup pies, with complexity that surprised those expecting something plain. Sorghum was affordable because Southern families often grew their own cane and pressed syrup each fall. The pie required no fancy techniques, just patience while it baked to glossy perfection with caramelized edges. Mothers made these when pecan trees had bare years or nuts cost more than the budget allowed. Sorghum pie proved resourcefulness created desserts every bit as satisfying as expensive versions.
Okra fritters with corn silk were the kind of kitchen magic that only came from necessity and imagination. In the long summer months, when the fields were full and money was not, people used every part of what they harvested. The corn silk that clung to the ears was not thrown away, but saved and shredded, added into batter alongside chopped okra, flour, and a splash of milk or water. When dropped into hot oil, the fritters puffed and crackled, their edges turning golden and crisp. The smell was something you could follow from down the road. Warm, nutty, and sweet with that faint scent of corn. Each bite was crunchy on the outside and tender in the middle, with little strings of corn silk that gave it texture and charm. They were served with syrup or vinegar, depending on what the family had, eaten right out of the pan when patience ran out. Okra fritters with corn silk were food born from care and cleverness, proof that waste had no place in a humble kitchen. Every family had its own version, passed quietly between generations, carrying the taste of late afternoons, hard work, and simple joy. They were poverty's poetry, fried into something worth remembering.
Tomato pie was the savory summer dish that earned its way onto 1970s Christmas tables when families used home-canned tomatoes preserved from gardens. A pre-baked pie crust was layered with thick tomato slices, fresh basil when available, and generous amounts of shredded cheese mixed with mayonnaise. The pie baked until bubbly and golden, its aroma filling kitchens with the promise of tangy, cheesy goodness. Each slice revealed layers of red tomato against creamy cheese topping. Tomato pie cost almost nothing when tomatoes came from jars families had put up themselves during summer. It provided vegetable dish and comfort food in one, satisfying both practical and indulgent needs. The pie connected winter celebrations to summer abundance. Tomato pie proved that preserving the harvest paid dividends at Christmas.
Number 20, skillet cornbread, fried in a coffee tin. This is the meal porters fried in a coffee tin when the dining car ran dry. By 1933, the Depression had cut Pullman's dining stocks thin, and on the long southern runs, the chefs sometimes ran out of food for the help by the second night. Porters who knew their way around the coal stove would empty a battered Maxwell House tin, oil the inside with a smear of bacon grease pulled from the morning rags, and drop a handful of cornmeal batter mixed with water from the washroom. The tin sat on the iron lid until the batter set into a thick, ragged cake. Porters cut it with a pocket knife and shared it between two men standing in the vestibule, the wind from the open Dutch door cooling their faces. It was hobo food cooked by men in white jackets, a meal invented inside a 400-hour month. Onion sandwiches were poverty meals requiring nothing more than bread, raw onion slices, and whatever fat was available for spreading. Families sliced onions thick, layered them between bread, spread with lard or bacon drippings, and packed them for lunches when nothing else was available. The onions provided nutrition and sharp flavor that made plain bread more interesting than eating it dry. During the Depression and other lean periods, onion sandwiches kept families fed when even pennies for other ingredients had disappeared. Children ate them without complaint because hunger taught appreciation for whatever appeared. The strong flavor meant that even thin onion slices could make bread taste like something rather than nothing. Adults understood these sandwiches represented temporary hardship rather than permanent condition. Streak-o-lean sandwiches featured cheap salt pork that was more fat than meat, fried until crispy and placed between bread while still hot. The pork was sliced thin, fried slowly until the fat rendered and edges crisped, creating something between bacon and fried fatback. The salt content was intense, providing essential sodium for bodies sweating through southern heat. Streak-o-lean cost less than bacon because it contained more fat and less meat, making it affordable for families stretching every penny. The fried slices soaked into bread, creating a rich, salty sandwich that satisfied hunger completely. Workers carried these, knowing the fat and salt would sustain them through brutal labor. Children learned to love the crispy edges and soft centers that made this humble cut taste like real sustenance. But if the drip tin represented careful economy, fat saved, fat cataloged, used with precision, the mayonnaise cake represented something else entirely, a Depression-era act of radical substitution that worked so well it outlasted the crisis that invented it. The first published recipe appeared in 1927, and Hellmann's promoted it nationally by 1937. But in African American households, it spread the way most of this knowledge spread, through women telling other women, not through advertisements. The logic was brilliant. Mayonnaise is emulsified oil and egg yolks with acid, the same three components a cake asks you to add separately. One jar replaced the eggs, replaced the oil, and provided moisture that kept the crumb tender for days. The cake that came out was not a compromise. It was richer, moister, and lasted longer than the standard version. Some of the women who baked it every year until they were gone never knew they were using a Depression innovation. They just knew it was the one their mothers had made. Corn cob jelly transformed kitchen scraps into a golden honey-like spread that sweetened biscuits and cornbread. After families ate fresh corn, the bare cobs were boiled for hours to extract their natural sugars and pectin, creating a liquid that set into delicate jelly when combined with sugar. This jelly tasted faintly of corn with a sweetness that rivaled expensive store-bought preserves. Black families made it during late summer when corn was plentiful, stretching the harvest into something that lasted through winter. The process required patience and fuel, but no additional cost beyond sugar, turning garbage into treasure. Children spread corn cob jelly thick on their breakfast bread, never knowing they were eating something born from scraps. This recipe demonstrated how nothing needed to be wasted when knowledge met necessity. Saltfish and hoe cakes was a breakfast rooted in heritage and preservation. Saltfish, cured to last months, was soaked overnight to soften, then flaked and pan-fried until tender. Hoe cakes, simple cornmeal cakes cooked on a griddle, were served alongside, their crisp edges soaking up the salty richness of the fish. Together, the two made a meal that was filling and steeped in history. The pairing reflected African and Caribbean influences that endured in Black kitchens, blending practicality with cultural memory. Saltfish provided protein when fresh catches were unavailable, while hoe cakes required only cornmeal, water, and fat. For families stretched thin, this breakfast needed nothing expensive, yet delivered real sustenance. It carried both thrift and tradition, ensuring strength for the day with ingredients that lasted any season. Streak-o-lean and biscuits was breakfast built on preserved pork that kept without refrigeration, essential during wartime when fresh meat was strictly rationed. Streak-o-lean, salt-cured pork belly with alternating layers of meat and fat was sliced thin and fried until crispy at the edges, the fat rendering into drippings that flavored everything else in the kitchen. Hot biscuits, often made with lard and buttermilk, soaked up those drippings until they glistened with porky richness. The combination provided calories and protein that fueled hard labor through long mornings of work. African American families kept streaker lean in smokehouses or cool cellars, knowing it would last through seasons when fresh meat was impossible to find. The salty, smoky flavor became the taste of morning itself for generations of children who woke to that smell drifting from cast iron skillets. This was survival food elevated to comfort. A spoonful of blackstrap molasses was as common in a black household during the 1940s as aspirin is today. Mothers stirred it into warm milk for children who looked pale. That thick, nearly black syrup, left over from the third boiling of sugarcane juice, carried more iron per tablespoon than red meat, along with calcium, magnesium, and potassium. Enslaved Africans had received molasses as part of weekly rations and turned a survival allotment into something closer to medicine. It went into cornbread batter over porridge and straight off the spoon when someone needed strength. Blackstrap was the cheapest grade because the sugar industry considered it waste. The community considered it a cure. By the 1980s, corn syrup pushed it to the back of every shelf. Every spring,
Lemony grit cakes were a clever way to make sure nothing went to waste. Leftover grits, once cooled, were shaped into patties and fried in fat until crisp on the outside and soft within. They were sometimes topped with syrup, gravy, or bits of meat, making them adaptable to whatever was available. African American families valued grit cakes because they stretched food further, creating another meal from yesterday's pot. They were quick to prepare and filling, a simple breakfast or side dish that carried both thrift and comfort. Children liked the crispy edges, while adults appreciated the versatility. Grit cakes reflected the creativity of survival cooking, proving that even scraps could be turned into something delicious. They carried the memory of hearth kitchens where nothing was discarded. Forgotten today, grit cakes were once essential, reminding families that food had to be respected and used wisely. They remain a quiet testament to resourcefulness.
Honey taffy was the Christmas candy made possible when families kept bees or knew neighbors who did, turning liquid gold into chewy sweetness. Honey was boiled with a little sugar and vinegar until it reached hard crack stage, then poured onto greased surfaces to cool. The pulling transformed the candy from sticky mass into satiny ropes that lightened in color with each stretch. Honey's floral sweetness gave the taffy distinctive flavor that plain sugar versions could never match. Children competed to pull the longest strands before the candy stiffened too much for shaping. The finished taffy was cut into pieces and wrapped in wax paper for storage. Honey taffy represented the intersection of beekeeping tradition and candy-making skill passed through generations.
Grease gravy rice was what people cooked when they refused to let anything go to waste. When breakfast meats were done frying, the leftover grease became treasure. A spoon of flour went in first, sizzling and popping until it turned golden. Then milk or water got poured in, slow and steady, until it thickened into smooth gravy. That hot gravy poured over white rice made something out of nearly nothing. It was salty, creamy, and smoky all at once. The smell filled the house and the taste filled the stomach. Parents called it breakfast, but it could carry a family through an entire day. It came from kitchens that knew survival like a second language, where flavor was earned from thrift and patience. Kids grew up thinking it was comfort food, not knowing it was born from rationing and struggle. Grease gravy rice was more than a recipe. It was a declaration that no meal was too small to matter. Every bite was a promise that the family would eat, even when times were lean. It was humble food that carried pride on a spoon.
German chocolate cake was the towering showpiece that appeared at 1970s Black Christmas gatherings, its coconut pecan frosting making it unforgettable. The chocolate cake layers were rich but not too sweet, providing perfect backdrop for the sticky, chunky frosting. The frosting was cooked on the stove top, combining evaporated milk, sugar, egg yolks, butter, vanilla, coconut, and pecans into caramel-colored deliciousness. Assembling the cake took patience, spreading frosting between layers and on top, while leaving the sides bare to show the dark chocolate. German chocolate cake required more effort than everyday desserts, which made it appropriate for special occasions. The cake proved that Christmas deserved extra effort in the kitchen. Families remembered who made the best version and requested it year after year.
100 dishes, 100 ways Black families refused to go hungry when the world gave them almost nothing to work with. If your grandmother or great-grandmother made any of these, drop the name of that dish in the comments. Let the rest of us know what your family kept alive. Subscribe so you never miss another trip back to the kitchen table that started it all.